As hard as it is to believe, 2024 is almost behind us. And if you tuned into our compilation earlier this week, you'll know that we're commemorating the occasion by taking a look back at some of the strangest crime stories we've covered this year. Today's video is going to be focusing exclusively on stories from our Crimes of the Week International series. Just a heads up, because this is a compilation style video, keep in mind that these segments have not been edited since they first appeared on their respective lists, so references to specific charges as well as other small details may no longer apply. If you missed the video from earlier this week, we've included a link to that in the description below. Lastly, before we get into the video, we wanted to give a huge thanks to every single one of you out there who tuned into the channel this year. We know that there's a ton of other places where you could have spent your valuable free time, and we're both flattered and extremely grateful that you chose to spend some of that time with us. Have a safe and happy new year, and here's to an even better and weirder 2025. Authorities in the Australian state of Victoria say that a 31-year-old man is facing a slew of charges this week after he allegedly crashed a stolen car and then tried to flee the scene using an Uber as his getaway vehicle. According to reports, the whole situation began just before midnight on January 9th, when police were called about a vehicle collision near the intersection of Ferntree Gully and Blackburn Roads in the Melbourne suburb of Clayton. When officers arrived, they were told by witnesses that the accident had been caused by a man who was driving recklessly at a high rate of speed. He had run off almost immediately afterwards, and police soon discovered why. The crashed vehicle was stolen. Thanks to information from witnesses, officers focused their search on an area of Blackburn Road where the suspect had been seen running. Not long after this, they spotted the man, who by now was in an Uber that was pulling out of the parking lot of a nearby hotel. When officers stopped the car, the man took off running once again, though he was quickly caught and arrested following a brief foot chase. At the time of this recording, the 31-year-old suspect has not been identified by name. However, police have revealed that he will be facing a number of charges. These include theft of a motor vehicle, breach of bail, driving without a license, dangerous driving, failing to render assistance, possessing methamphetamine, and dealing with the suspected proceeds of crime. Representatives from Brazil's military police say that a 43-year-old is facing charges this week after she drunkenly tried to steal a bus, only to almost immediately crash the vehicle and get herself arrested. According to reports, the whole thing happened at around 9:40 p.m. on January 16th when a bus driver pulled over at a stop in São Paulo's East Zone. While getting out to hand a report to an inspector on the line, he left his keys in the vehicle's ignition. He was only gone for a few moments, but apparently that was more than enough time for 43-year-old Erica Custodio, who immediately noticed the bus was unoccupied. After climbing on board, Custodio allegedly made a beeline for the driver's seat. Fortunately, she didn't make it very far though, as after just a few seconds behind the wheel, she smashed into the back of 4 taxis that were parked in front of her, causing the bus to become stuck. In a video of the incident that was recorded by witnesses, Custodio can be heard being yelled at by the taxi drivers, who are understandably pissed about what has just happened. Custodio, however, appears to be in no fit state to communicate. The reason why became apparent when police arrived at the scene and placed the 43-year-old under arrest. She reportedly reeked of alcohol, was having trouble standing up straight, and was noticeably slurring her words. Custodio is now facing multiple charges, including theft, drunk driving, and driving without permission or license. At the time of this recording, she remains in custody. Is that a tortoise in your pants? Or are you just trying to rob me? That's what I imagine was going through the head of one Taiwanese pet store owner this week when he discovered an alleged thief inside of his shop who tried to pull off quite the bizarre crime. According to reports, the whole thing started at around 4 p.m. on January 21st when an aquarium store owner in the city of Tainan noticed something strange as he was walking through the aisles of his store. While looking for customers who might need help, he instead came across a 57-year-old man, later identified by the last name of Chen, who was both looking and acting rather strange. The owner soon discovered why when he saw the giant bulge in one of the pockets of Chen's jeans. As if on cue, out fell a small Brazilian turtle, which the 57-year-old had clearly stolen from one of the store's tanks. Though Chen attempted to flee the scene after this not-so-subtle gaffe, he was quickly stopped after the owner managed to flag down police. The owner then handed Chen a bucket, who proceeded to pull 14 other turtles out of his pants. Apparently, the animals altogether retailed for about 6,500 new Taiwan dollars, or about $200 US. Unsurprisingly, Chen was arrested at the scene and is now facing theft charges. While hopefully the lesson that the 57-year-old learns from this is that stealing is wrong, if he is planning any future criminal endeavors, he might want to think about adjusting his approach. As one local journalist hilariously put it, he might have gotten away with it if he hadn't been so greedy, or if he had simply invested in a pair of pants with deeper pockets. A 31-year-old man from Sapporo, Japan, may want to lay off the city's namesake beer for a while after he was arrested following an alleged drunken break-in at a school. According to reports, the whole thing began at around 5:45 a.m. on January 27th, when police were alerted that an alarm had been triggered at a local middle school. They arrived at the scene to find that the glass had been shattered on one of the building's front doors, and when they investigated further, they soon discovered why. The culprit was a 31-year-old man who was found sleeping on the floor in front of the school's staff room. Upon being woken up, the man, who was still clearly intoxicated, attempted to explain his actions. He said that he had been drinking all night in the city's Susukino district and claimed that he thought the school was his home. When he got there and his key wouldn't fit the lock, naturally he assumed it was the door's fault and apparently kicked in the glass so he could go inside. The man was arrested at the scene on suspicion of breaking and entering, as well as property destruction. His name has not been released at this time. A Singaporean man reportedly won't have a whole lot going on for the next couple weeks after he was sentenced to jail time in connection with a fake crime he reported last year. A stunt which he ironically pulled off out of boredom. According to reports, the whole thing started at around 9:40 p.m. on April 28, 2023, when police were alerted about a possible crime by a friend of 48-year-old Eddie Mazawan. The friend said that he had just received a call from Mazawan, who claimed that he had just been mugged by 3 Chinese guys outside of his housing board block in the town of Bukit Batok. He further claimed that one of them had tried to snatch his bag as they had walked past. Concerned, the friend had run down there immediately and contacted police along the way. When police arrived at the scene, Mazawan initially told them the same story he had to his friend. However, as he was pressed for more information, things started to crumble. First, he changed the timing of the incident, saying that it had actually happened 2 weeks earlier. A few hours into his interview with police, he admitted that nothing had actually happened at all. He said he made up the story to prank his friend because he was bored. Now, I'm not sure how familiar all of you are with the Singaporean legal system, but suffice it to say, they don't around when it comes to law and order. This is a country that is notorious for killing people for relatively low-level drug offenses. Seriously, they will put you on death row for half a kilo of weed. This week, Mazawan pleaded guilty to 1 count of giving false information to a public servant and was sentenced to 12 days in jail. It appears he got off easy, too. Had the court decided not to go easy on him, he could have ended up with a 2-year prison sentence and a large fine. Authorities in the Australian state of New South Wales say that a driver is facing drug charges this week following an embarrassing gaffe in which he was pulled over for a random traffic stop and accidentally handed a police officer a baggie of cocaine. According to reports, the incident took place sometime on January 29th when the driver in question was pulled over for a random breath test by a member of the Hawkesbury Highway Patrol in the Sydney suburb of Mulgrave. Upon being asked to provide his license, the man complied, though unintentionally handed over more than he realized. After grabbing the license, the highway officer felt something stuck to the back. He turned it over to find a small plastic baggie which contained a small amount of white powder. When confronted with the baggie, the driver admitted that the powder was cocaine, which he said he had been using on New Year's Eve. He said he put the baggie in his wallet that night and forgot about it. He claimed he hadn't used it since. The driver's breath and drug tests checked out, so he was allowed to go, but he was handed a notice to appear in court on drug possession charges. His name has not been released at this time. Authorities in France say that a young man is in custody this week following an embarrassing gaffe in which he accidentally left his phone at the scene of a crime, then tried to call to get it back. According to reports, the whole thing started sometime on February 2nd when the suspect, a minor who has not been identified by name, was committing a burglary at an apartment in the Paris suburb of Colombes. He was right in the middle of the crime when the owner of the place came home, causing him to grab what he could and run for it. Though the young suspect was allegedly able to grab the unidentified victim's laptop before fleeing, unfortunately for him, he quickly realized that he had made a mistake. In his haste to escape, he had left behind his phone at the scene. Unbelievably, the suspect called his phone several minutes later and spoke with the person he had just robbed. He offered to return the laptop if he could get his phone back, to which the victim agreed. They then called the police. Obviously, the suspect didn't think this through, because apparently he actually showed back up at the crime scene later that morning. When he did, police were waiting, who placed him under arrest. Authorities in the southern Thai province of Narathiwat say that a 28-year-old man is facing charges this week following a bizarre incident in which he allegedly tried to steal a farm animal while drunk, only to have his harebrained scheme quickly backfire. According to reports, the whole thing began sometime on February 2nd when police were called to the scene of an accident in Su-ngai Padi district. Officers arrived to find a silver sedan lying in a ditch at the side of a local road, which was smashed up and had rolled fully onto one side. Police quickly turned their attention to the 28-year-old driver, a man named Mustaqim May. He had managed to escape the wreckage with only minor injuries, though was quite clearly under the influence of alcohol. Understandably, authorities initially thought they were dealing with an open and shut drunk driving case. That was, until they noticed something else. Peering out through the smashed back window of the overturned vehicle was the head of a very confused black cow. When asked about the cow, May said that the animal belonged to his father-in-law, who had given it to him a little while earlier. He said that all he had to transport the cow was his small car, so he tried to make the best of what he had. May's wife arrived shortly thereafter and backed up her husband's story. The situation got even stranger, though, when a local farmer named Kla ran up to the scene and said that May and his wife were lying. He claimed that the cow belonged to him and that May had stolen it after he let the animal out to graze in his field. At this point, May apparently began changing his story, telling officers that he never meant to steal the cow. He now claimed that he had been driving when he encountered the animal blocking the roadway. The situation made him angry, so naturally he decided the best course of action was to cram the cow into the back of his sedan and take it home. May said the animal got scared while he was driving, and that was why he lost control of the vehicle. Police were apparently not convinced by May's shifting stories and ended up charging him with stealing property belonging to a farmer. If convicted, he could be looking at a sentence of up to 5 years, as well as a fine of between 20,000 and 100,000 baht, or about $560 to $2,800 US. In case you were wondering, it appears that the cow involved in the incident was unharmed. Authorities in the English county of Merseyside say that a 33-year-old man has been sentenced to jail time this week, following a bizarre and ridiculous incident last year in which he stole food from a local store and then tried to rob a delivery driver using a fire extinguisher as a weapon. According to reports, the whole thing unfolded on the morning of July 24th, 2023, at Dunn's convenience store in the town of Prescot. It was around 6:30 a.m., and by all accounts, it was a normal Monday, until suddenly 33-year-old Daniel Yates walked in and stole a ham and cheese sandwich and a keyring. While the two items were only worth a total of £4.68, staff at the business had apparently been terrorized by Yates for at least 2 months prior to this, following numerous incidents at the store. They called police, who quickly arrived at the scene. By the time officers got there, though, things had reportedly escalated once again. After stealing the sandwich and the keyring, the 33-year-old had attacked a delivery driver who was dropping off newspapers at the store. Catching the driver off guard, he demanded his keys, blasting him in the face with a fire extinguisher. Unfortunately for Yates, the driver was able to hold his own, and after being chased around the van, grabbed a metal pipe to defend himself. During the struggle, Yates not only dropped the fire extinguisher, but got blasted in the face himself with it by the infuriated driver before he drove off. Yates was arrested at the scene. This week, the 33-year-old was sentenced to 2.5 years in jail for the two offenses. The length of the sentence was in part due to his previous criminal history. Yates's lawyer stated during the proceedings that the 33-year-old struggled with drugs and alcohol and was doing his best to turn his life around. Yates also apologized to everyone involved, saying that he, quote, wishes he could turn back the clock. Authorities in the Australian state of Queensland say that a 35-year-old man is in custody this week following a dramatic car chase down a busy highway. One that apparently ended with the suspect stopping to take a selfie before being placed under arrest. The whole thing started at around 11:30 a.m. on February 14th, when police were called about a domestic violence disturbance at a home in the suburb of Mountain Creek in the Sunshine Coast region. It's unclear exactly what that incident involved, though it appears that by the time officers arrived, a 35-year-old man involved in the situation had fled the scene in a red Mitsubishi SUV. Once on the road, the suspect began traveling north on the Bruce Highway, where he reportedly began driving recklessly. Witnesses say that he caused a series of near accidents, at one point going airborne after hitting 2 speed bumps at a high rate of speed. It's alleged that he also attempted to steal a truck, which was left immobilized on the highway, causing a major backlog of traffic. The situation continued for more than 2 hours as police attempted to chase down the suspect. According to reports, at least 20 police vehicles were involved in the pursuit, as well as a helicopter which tracked the situation from the air. The chase finally came to an end at around 2 p.m. in Noosa, about 18 miles from where it first began. The 35-year-old pulled over after negotiating with police and was taken into custody, though apparently not before sneaking in a selfie as officers surrounded him and placed him in handcuffs. At the time of this recording, police say that they are still investigating the situation and have not released any motive behind the crime. Of particular interest is a handgun that was found in the suspect's car, which authorities stated may be a replica. So far, the 35-year-old's name has not been released, and he currently remains in custody, awaiting charges. A 34-year-old Englishman has reportedly been banned from driving, as well as handed a large chunk of community service hours, following a recent incident in which he was caught for drunk driving after deciding to take a nap in the middle of the road. According to reports, the whole thing started in the early morning hours of January 28th, when officers from the Cambridgeshire Police were on patrol near the town of Godmanchester. It was around 4:15 a.m. and they were driving down the A1307, a divided 2-lane highway, when they spotted a car that was sitting in the middle of the road. At first, officers thought the car was broken down, so they pulled over to offer the motorist some assistance. However, when they got up to the driver's side window of the vehicle, a Mercedes C220, they realized what was actually going on. The man inside, later identified as 34-year-old Emmanuel Osai, was taking a nap. He still had his seatbelt on, and the vehicle's engine was running. Understandably, police suspected that Emmanuel might have been under the influence of alcohol, so after some questions, they asked him to submit to a roadside test, one which he did not pass.
Hello mate, you alright?
Yeah.
Can you open the door for me please? What's up sir?
Oh, it's a little bit tight, that's right. Okay, now I'm rested.
You're parked and you're rested in the middle of a dual carriageway?
Oh, no, not this one.
Have you had any alcohol this evening? Yes.
Yes.
Right. You're in the middle of the road?
This isn't a lay-by.
Yeah.
You're in the middle of the road. And this is a junction, and you're just stopped here. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, stop. Okay, so you failed.
I love that bit at the end there. You failed. Anyway, all jokes aside, thankfully no one was hurt as a result of this incident. Emmanuel has since pleaded guilty to drunk driving and was handed a 3.5-year driving ban as well as 120 hours of community service. Officials in Cambodia say that a pair of Taiwanese men have been sentenced to prison time this week, days after they allegedly filmed and posted content for a YouTube channel in which they fraudulently claimed to be the victims of a kidnapping gang. According to reports, the whole thing started sometime on February 12th, when Chen Nangchuan, better known by his YouTube name Goodnight Chicken, posted a series of videos to his channel in which he claimed that he and his friend Lu Tzu Xian had been abducted. In the footage, Chen and Lu apparently said that they had been targeted by a gang of kidnappers and that they were in desperate need of help. Initially, the videos seemed to have been taken quite seriously, and for good reason. The area where the two men were staying, in the port city of Sihanoukville, is notorious for these kinds of crimes. In particular, criminal gangs abducting victims and then forcing them to carry out online scams. Things got even more alarming the following day when Chen's wife posted on social media saying that her husband had gone missing. However, things started to change a short time later when Chen posted another video during which he spoke of a miraculous escape. He said that he and Lu had managed to run away from their captors and showed off his partially shaved head as evidence, which he claimed had happened during the ordeal. Some viewers, though, thought that the whole thing was a little too good to be true, causing some of them to investigate further. One of those who found the situation hard to believe was another online personality named Lu Yu, who upon studying the footage was able to figure out where it had been shot. Through this, he realized that Chen and his friend were not running away as they claimed. They were simply circling the same area. Lu also brought up another good point. If the man had really been taken captive, why had their abductors allowed them to keep their live streaming equipment? Not long after this, Chen and Lu were arrested at their hotel room. Inside, police reportedly recovered a number of props used in the hoax. A few days later, they were found guilty on charges of incitement to cause chaos to Social Security. The men have now both been sentenced to 2 years in prison and handed a fine worth the equivalent of about $2,000 US. Officials in Peru say that a pair of accused drug dealers received quite the Valentine's Day surprise this week when they opened up the door to what they thought was a grand romantic gesture, only to find themselves the targets of an undercover drug bust. According to reports, the whole thing happened the afternoon before Valentine's Day, February 13th, at a residence somewhere in the northern part of the capital of Lima. That's where officers from the anti-drug unit known as the Green Squadron had gathered to carry out a bust after receiving credible tips that a pair of women had been dealing large quantities of illicit substances out of their apartment. Knowing that the women likely wouldn't open the door to just anyone, police opted for a rather amusing solution. They dressed up one of their officers in a large teddy bear costume, then had him call up to the women from the street below. In footage, the teddy bear officer can be seen on one knee with a heart-shaped balloon, a box of chocolates, and a sign with a message that translates to, quote, "You are my reason to smile." The ruse proved incredibly effective, as one of the suspects could soon be seen running down the stairs to greet the teddy bear. When she did, he tackled her to the ground, prompting other plainclothes officers to rush in. A subsequent search of the apartment resulted in the arrest of the second female suspect, as well as the recovery of cocaine paste and other drugs. The women are said to be a mother and daughter duo who are allegedly part of a gang called the Drug Cheats. While the incident made international headlines following the arrests, this is far from the first time that Lima's Green Squadron has been in the news for their creative approach to drug busts. If you'll recall, we've covered a few similar incidents before, including one just this past December where they dressed up one of their officers as Santa Claus. Representatives from England's Norfolk Police say that an elderly man has pleaded guilty to multiple offences this week after he was found to be in possession of nearly 3,000 illegal wild bird eggs, which he claims he is addicted to collecting. According to reports, 71-year-old Daniel Lingham was busted last year after he was captured on a hidden wildlife camera stealing 2 nightjar eggs from a nest in the Holtlows Nature Preserve. Apparently, police identified Lingham in part thanks to his distinctive walking stick, which they recognized in the video, which was taken on June 9th, 2023. They were about to discover this was far from an isolated incident. When authorities searched Lingham's house later that summer, they discovered a total of 2,995 wild bird eggs, more than 2,400 of which were from native bird species which are protected by law. Of particular concern to police were 546 eggs at the residence which were from the red list, meaning they belong to birds which are of most serious concern from a conservation perspective. Among the massive collection were the 2 nightjar eggs Lingham was seen on camera taking, which had been labeled with the exact date he had taken them. This week, Lingham pleaded guilty to 5 offenses related to his massive collection of illegal eggs. Offenses which include breaching a previous criminal behavior order related to other similar incidents in the past. In fact, it seems that the 71-year-old has a lengthy history of disregarding the law in this area. In 2005, he was jailed for 10 weeks after police found a collection of 4,000 eggs at his home. In 2018, he was jailed for 18 weeks and given the criminal behavior order in question after he was found to have another collection of 5,000 eggs. Presumably, police have been confiscating the illegal eggs every time, which is really staggering when you think about it. That means that Lingham has been directly responsible for nearly 12,000 protected birds not being born into the wild. It's kind of scary just how much damage a single person can do when you put it that way. For his part, Lingham claims that the egg collecting is an addiction and that the compulsion he feels to collect them is a mental health issue. He is due to be sentenced in connection with his most recent case on May 3rd. Representatives from England's North Yorkshire Police say that they were left quite stunned recently after an alleged drunk driver apparently called them to report himself upon realizing that he was in no condition to be behind the wheel. According to reports, the whole thing started earlier this month on February 12th when North Yorkshire Police received a 999 call from a 52-year-old man. The man said that he was driving in the town of Knaresborough and that he was under the influence of alcohol. Disconcertingly, he claimed he didn't know what he was doing. After providing authorities with further details, they managed to track the 52-year-old down, who had pulled over to the side of the road in a black work van. The man allegedly admitted that he, quote, had a heavy weekend before taking a roadside breath test where he blew more than 3 times the legal limit. He was arrested at the scene and was later charged with drunk driving. Following the incident, authorities posted about the situation on social media, saying, quote, man calls the police to report that he is a drink driver. Well, it's not every day that this happens. A suspected drink driver dobs themselves into the police. While it's easy to see why police were amused, many also came to the man's defense. They said that at least he did the right thing after doing the wrong thing. At the time of this recording, the man's name has not been released. Authorities in South Australia say that a man is facing charges this week following a bizarre and poorly thought-out carjacking targeting a taxi driver. According to reports, the whole thing started at around 4 a.m. on March 3rd when the victim, an unidentified taxi driver in the city of Adelaide, picked up the suspect on King William Street in the city's central business district. The man said that he wanted to go to Hindley Street. However, things quickly went sideways. After getting inside, the suspect allegedly punched the driver in the shoulder and forced him out of the vehicle. He then drove off, leaving the driver stranded. Unfortunately for the suspect, his getaway was short-lived. The vehicle was equipped with GPS tracking, and it was quickly followed, leading police to a McDonald's in the suburb of Preah. It was here, in the drive-through line, that the man was cornered and placed under arrest. At the time of this recording, the suspect has only been identified as a 36-year-old man, though it's said that he is now facing charges including illegal use, assault, and property damage. Authorities in the historic Japanese city of Kyoto say that a 45-year-old local man is facing charges this week after a bizarre incident in which he allegedly set fire to his family home following an argument with his mother over breakfast. According to reports, the whole thing started shortly before 9 a.m. on March 8th, when emergency responders were called about a fire at a 3-story wooden house. They arrived to find the place engulfed in flames, and though firefighters acted quickly, about 860 square meters of the property was completely destroyed. Thankfully, no one was seriously hurt. A 67-year-old woman had managed to escape completely unharmed, while the only other person inside, the woman's 45-year-old son, Satoshi Yoshizaki, was treated for smoke inhalation. Apparently, though, the case got pretty strange from here. When questioned about what had happened, Yoshizaki apparently admitted that he was the one who had started the fire. He stated that on the morning of the incident, he had gotten into a heated argument with his 67-year-old mother because he wasn't happy with what was being served for breakfast. As a result, he went to his room and set fire to boxes of tissues, a situation that quickly got out of hand. Yoshizaki was arrested on March 11th on suspicion of arson and currently remains in custody. Apparently, the 45-year-old is unemployed and lived at the house with his mother and 42-year-old brother, who was at work when the crime took place. Authorities in the Australian state of Victoria released the details of a bizarre recent burglary case this week after a woman allegedly broke into a bakery in the middle of the night, though not before she was caught on video doing an elaborate stretching routine outside first. The footage was captured in the early morning hours of March 3rd, just outside the main kitchen of Philippa's Bakery in the Melbourne suburb of Richmond. The video shows a woman who is dressed in all black sitting on the sidewalk at the edge of the parking lot, who begins to run through a series of different stretches. After showing off her flexibility for several minutes, the woman allegedly got up, broke into the bakery facility, and proceeded to burglarize the place. Among the items reportedly stolen were a pair of shoes, an iPad, some cleaning products, and a number of the bakery's almond-topped croissants. Thanks to the footage, the woman was quickly arrested. However, her name has not been released. So far, all that's been revealed is that she's a 44-year-old from the local area. When news of the crime was reported this week, the bakery posted some of the footage of the suspect's strange stretching routine to their Instagram account. They included the caption, quote, "We were quite surprised when we saw the security footage from a recent break-in at our bakery HQ. Seems like yoga is a must before breaking in." Understandably, this prompted social media users to chime in with their own theories about why the woman was trying to get a quick stretch in before committing the crime. One commenter wondered, quote, "Is this about working off the calories of the croissants before they steal them?" According to police, the 44-year-old woman has now been charged with theft, burglary, and going equipped to steal. She was released on bail and is due to appear back in court in May. Authorities in the English county of Nottinghamshire say that a 36-year-old man has been officially sentenced to jail time this week, months after an audacious and shameless museum burglary that saw him steal a number of priceless artifacts. The heist took place in the early morning hours of October 29, 2023, at the Royal Lancers in Nottinghamshire Yeomanry Museum. The military museum, which is located in Thoresby Park, is home to a collection of historical artifacts and is specifically dedicated to the history of 3 old and famous British cavalry regiments. According to police, 36-year-old Graham Gallen didn't care about any of that, though. Instead, he just knew that some of the museum's collection was worth a lot of money. Particularly, some of the items made out of silver and other precious metals that were kept in a display case. So it was that approximately 2:40 a.m. that morning, Gallen cut a hole in the museum floor and underneath the display case in question, allowing him to get access to it secretly from underneath. Using an endoscope, he was able to see his targets, which he allegedly pulled down with the help of a grabber tool normally used to pick up trash. while Gallen managed to make off with a number of priceless items, including a rosewater dish, a military polo trophy, a cavalry trumpet, and statuettes of mounted soldiers. He was ultimately undone by his own greed. After trying to pull a silver dish through the floor, he was forced to leave it behind because it wouldn't fit through his hole, inadvertently leaving behind his DNA as well. This week, Gallen pleaded guilty to burglary and was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. Police believe he had accomplices and say that a 24-year-old woman and a 47-year-old man were arrested. However, they are still under investigation. Sadly, at the time of this recording, most of what was stolen in last year's heist has not been recovered, with police saying it's likely it was melted down for its silver and sold off. This has outraged many, who say that they do not believe Gallen's sentence was harsh enough, considering the history that he destroyed. Representatives from China's Hong Kong Customs and Excise Department announced a record-breaking bust this week, revealing that they had recently seized a large amount of gold that was allegedly being smuggled out of the country and which had been cleverly disguised to avoid detection. According to reports, the incident began on March 27th when part of a shipment that was bound for Japan was selected for inspection at Hong Kong International Airport's cargo terminal. The documentation for the shipment said that it consisted of 2 air compressors. However, customs officers decided to take a closer look after running it through an X-ray machine and noticing that the items had an unusual weight. After removing the outer casings of the 2 air compressors, officers noticed that some of the parts inside the motor were uneven and didn't look right. Even stranger, some of the pieces had what appeared to be glue on them. A light scraping of the metal quickly revealed why. The paint easily chipped off, revealing gold underneath. Upon further examination, authorities learned that several parts of the air compressor's motors, including a large gear, rotor, and 3 screw shafts, were all made out of solid gold. In all, there was 146 kilograms, or about 322 pounds of the precious metal, worth an estimated $10.7 million US. Customs officials now allege that the gold had been molded into the shape of machine parts by criminals who were trying to smuggle it into Japan undetected. It's believed that a crime group in Japan was behind the operation and were looking to avoid taxes. So far, only 1 arrest has been made, a 31-year-old man who was taken into custody in Hong Kong on suspicion of attempting to export unmanifested cargo. If convicted of the offense, the man could be looking at up to 7 years in prison and a fine of over $250,000. A representative from Hong Kong Customs told the media that the bust was the largest of its kind in the agency's more than 115-year history. He called the smuggling operation well-planned and sophisticated, saying in part, quote, "They made use of the strong structure of air compressors to conceal the heaviness of the gold in an attempt to avoid detection. The situation is still under investigation." A 51-year-old German man's cheeky plan to find success in the modern art world reportedly backfired recently when a stunt he carried out at the gallery where he worked not only cost him his job, but also landed him under investigation by the police. The whole thing took place near the end of February when the man in question was working at the Pinakothek de Moderne in central Munich. The museum features one of the largest collections of modern art in Germany, housing roughly 20,000 pieces from famous artists such as Pablo Picasso, Andy Warhol, Salvador Dali, and Vasily Kandinsky. The 51-year-old wasn't just an appreciator of art, though. He apparently fancied himself a great artist as well. In fact, he reasoned that if he could only get his work up alongside these other famous painters, he was sure to get his big break. That's when he came up with a rather unorthodox way to get noticed. Taking advantage of his job as a technician at the museum, the 51-year-old reportedly went in one night after the place was closed. He brought with him one of his paintings, which he proceeded to hang up in one of the building's halls. Unfortunately for the aspiring artist, other employees at the museum noticed his 2-foot by 4-foot canvas pretty quickly. The painting was taken down within a day, and it also didn't take them long to figure out who had put it up. Once the whole scheme came to light, the 51-year-old was not only fired, the police were called. The man is apparently now under investigation for property damage because he drilled holes in the museum's walls to hang his painting. At the time of this recording, it's unclear what will happen in the case, as the police report was only revealed to the public this week. The name of the 51-year-old, meanwhile, has not been released. People across Thailand are outraged and are calling for authorities to conduct an investigation this week after video footage recently emerged online of a foreign tourist appearing to desecrate a popular shrine in a pretty stomach-churning way. Apparently, the whole thing started sometime on April 11th in Bangkok's Klong Toei district. While local residents were trying to enjoy a day at the local Soi Nana shopping area, they were instead treated to a disgusting eyeful. More specifically, they watched in horror as a rather plump tourist pulled down his pants and defecated at the side of the road, right outside a well-known Buddhist temple. Not simply content with this rather gross display, the man then went onto the grounds of the temple itself, where he proceeded to strip naked. He then began washing himself off in one of the temple's fountains. At one point, he was hosed off by a security guard at the facility, who I can only imagine was just trying to get this man to go on his way. I'm honestly not trying to be disrespectful here, but the photos of this have all the energy of a zookeeper hosing down an elephant. Unsurprisingly, when this footage was shared, it quickly went viral on Thai social media. And let's just say, many people weren't super happy to see one of their holy sites being sullied by a fat Westerner who had just shit himself in public. Some went as far as to say that the police should get involved. While it's unclear if authorities have any plans to look into the situation, the incident is unfortunately part of a growing trend of tourists behaving poorly in the country. At the time of this recording, the man's name has not been released. A 47-year-old Japanese man was reportedly foiled by his own good manners this week after he allegedly attempted to carry out a robbery at a convenience store, only to bizarrely call back afterwards to apologize. According to reports, the whole thing started at around 7:40 p.m. on April 15th, when the suspect, later identified as 47-year-old Nobuyuki Nagata, walked into a 7-Eleven location in the town of Komono in Mie Prefecture. Rather than grabbing any items, the 47-year-old instead headed directly for the counter where a 55-year-old female employee was behind the register. Once there, Nagata allegedly pulled out a bottle of cleaning solution, then started spraying the woman and screaming, "I'll kill you! Give me the money!" While this was likely pretty terrifying for the employee, as you might imagine, the spray bottle wasn't all that effective of a weapon. As a result, Nagata apparently fled the store empty-handed pretty quickly. The situation got even stranger a few minutes later when the employee received a phone call at the store. She picked up only to hear the same man who had just tried to rob her on the other end. He said, "Sorry about what I just did," before hanging up. When police arrived at the scene, they called this number back. Nagata apparently answered, told officers where he was, and then waited for them to arrest him. While the 47-year-old admitted during questioning that he threatened to kill the 7-Eleven employee, strangely, he claimed that he never actually wanted any money. It's unclear if this was an attempt to get out of a robbery charge, though at minimum it appears Nagata will now be facing assault charges. Authorities in the South Korean capital of Seoul say that a man has been sentenced to prison time this week, 3 months after a bizarre crime involving fake currency and a serious grudge against his upstairs neighbors. According to reports, the whole thing started sometime on January 15th of this year, when police were alerted to a strange situation in Seoul's Nowon district. Specifically, a 43-year-old man, identified only by the last name of Jo, was throwing counterfeit money out of the window of his apartment building. In all, it said that Jo threw at least 288 counterfeit 50,000 won banknotes outside, along with 32 fraudulent gift certificates. At least one of the fake bills was apparently picked up and used by someone who didn't realize it wasn't real. When police went into Joel's apartment, they discovered that he had been photocopying and printing counterfeit money for weeks. Strangely, he had also been making leaflets that advertised illegal drugs and sex with minors. He had handed out at least 58 of these leaflets, which had the addresses of his upstairs neighbors on them. Apparently, Joel's idea was to make it look like they were involved in illegal activities. He did this because he was angry at them for making too much noise. This week, Joel was found guilty of multiple charges, including counterfeiting currency, counterfeiting valuable securities, as well as defamation for those weird leaflets. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison. Authorities in the Pakistani port city of Karachi announced that they had concluded a more than 2-month-long murder investigation this week, revealing in the process the ridiculous alleged motive behind the crime. According to reports, the whole thing started on the night of February 8th of this year, when 17-year-old Ali Curio went to hang out with his friend Daniil Nazir at his family's home in the city's Defense Housing Authority area. They were joined by a couple other friends, as well as Daniil's girlfriend, Shazia. The evening was apparently going normally until Daniil ordered a couple of hamburgers for him and Shazia. However, things apparently went off the rails when the food arrived, and Ali took a bite out of the burger that was supposed to be meant for Shazia. This single, albeit immature act, reportedly sent Daniil into such a rage that he grabbed one of his father's guns and shot Ali. Though he and others then tried to take the teen to a hospital, the damage was already done. Sadly, Ali was pronounced dead a short time later. While Daniil was arrested almost immediately after the incident, it wasn't until this week that all of the information about the hamburger-related motive came out. Making things even worse, optically speaking, both of the young men involved are apparently the sons of important people within the local justice system. Ali's father is a judge, while Daniil's father is a senior superintendent of police. At the time of this recording, Daniil remains in custody and is currently awaiting trial for murder. After researching and writing about crime stories for several years now, I like to think that few things in this arena surprise me anymore. However, I gotta hand it to the guy in this next story. He is a living reminder that just when you think you've heard and seen it all, the universe has a way of one-upping itself in the ridiculousness department. A video clip went viral across Thai social media this week after a police officer posted an amusing interaction between him and a suspect, one in which the man can be seen offering a rather novel excuse for his drug use. The whole thing apparently took place recently when the unidentified suspect was arrested for possession and use of methamphetamine. While this on its own obviously wasn't that out of the ordinary, things took a hilarious and unexpected turn when police began talking to the man on their way back to the station. During the car ride, the man revealed what he said was the real reason he was buying and using meth. He claimed that he was doing it to, quote, protect the youth. Specifically, he said that he was only using meth so that teens would have less access to it. He claimed that he didn't even like the drug, though the actual video interaction between the unidentified man and the officers is in Thai. Thankfully, local news sources provided a rough English translation of the conversation. The officer behind the camera asked the man if meth is expensive, to which the man replies, quote, no, not at all. Very cheap. Too cheap. The officer then asks, well, if you don't like it then, why buy it? To which the man says, quote, without me, teenagers would have easy access. When the clip of the interaction was posted online, many understandably responded with jokes. One commenter wrote, quote, what a good man! Such a great sacrifice for the younger generation. Another chimed in that the man should be given a position with the Public Health Authority. Even a news report we came across sarcastically pondered whether the man's, quote, heroic act would contribute to a reduction in his sentence. At the time of this recording, the man's identity has not been released. It's therefore unclear what charges he is currently facing. A wild bit of video footage out of Australia made the rounds on social media this week after an unknown man managed to breach security at one of the country's largest airports and was witnessed trespassing in dangerous areas before trying to sneak into the cargo area of an internationally bound flight. The strange events unfolded sometime on April 26th when the suspect in question, identified only as a 30-year-old man, was able to gain access to restricted areas of Sydney International Airport. It's not clear exactly how the whole thing started, though according to a couple of local news reports, the man ran through the main screening area of the airport, after which he briefly disappeared. The next time the man was seen, he was walking along the top of an aero bridge. You know, those little tunnels you walk through to board your flight? He was caught on video as he made his way to the end of the structure before jumping down onto the tarmac close to a waiting airplane. The plane was apparently bound for Sri Lanka and at the time was in the middle of being loaded with baggage for the flight. Employees who were handling the bags were caught off guard as the man got onto one of the ramps leading into the plane and attempted to make his way into the cargo area. While the employees attempted to stop the man and figure out what was going on, he was not cooperative. It wasn't until officers from the Australian Federal Police arrived a short time later that he was stopped and placed under arrest. The man was issued a court attendance notice for breaching restricted areas of the airport and has now been banned from the facility for a year. While he has so far not been charged with any further criminal offenses, according to reports, he could be looking at a fine of up to $5,500. It's believed that the 30-year-old was experiencing a mental health episode at the time the incident took place. Authorities in the Argentine capital of Buenos Aires say that a local woman is in hot water this week following a bizarre raid at her home museum dedicated to extraterrestrials. According to reports, the raid, which took place sometime recently, was carried out by agents from Interpol. It happened at the home of Silvia Simondini, whose residence apparently doubles as the Museo del OVNI, or in English, the UFO Museum. The house boasts dozens of historical artifacts which Simondini claims offer definitive proof of extraterrestrial life. One of these exhibits is a skeletonized bit of foot which Simondini believes belongs to a tridactyl mummy. Believers in so-called tridactyl mummies believe that they are the remains of a three-fingered alien species, one which had been found in the Nazca region of Peru. Scientists, however, believe the bizarre artifacts have decidedly earthly origins, and that they are instead dolls that were made of mummified human and animal parts. It appears that authorities do agree with Simondini on one thing, though. Her prized tridactyl mummy part is from Peru. In fact, this is what got her in trouble. You see, Argentina and Peru have an agreement to assist each other when it comes to investigating cases of illegal trading and smuggling of archaeological and cultural artifacts. It's alleged that Simondini's mummy foot is one of dozens of such artifacts that she obtained illegally, which is what prompted the raid at her house. According to reports, at least 60 items were seized from the UFO Museum, though it's unclear if Simondini will be facing charges over the artifacts. For her part, Simondini claims that she tried to give the mummy foot to museums in Peru several times, but that they never showed any interest. The bizarre case is still under investigation. A middle-aged Japanese government worker recently found himself on the receiving end of both professional and legal consequences following a bizarre incident in which he allegedly flew into a rage at his office and attacked a fellow employee because he spoiled a plot point in a popular graphic novel series. The whole thing took place earlier this year at the Uji branch of the Kyoto District Legal Affairs Bureau. The government office is usually responsible for handling legal paperwork for things like real estate transactions and the filing of new business documents. However, on February 1st, the Bureau played host to some decidedly unlawful conduct, when one of its managers allegedly went full beast mode on a subordinate. According to reports, the problems began when the junior employee, identified only as a man in his 20s, was discussing some of the latest plot points about the popular manga series Oshinoko. For those unfamiliar, manga are a form of comics or graphic novels featuring uniquely Japanese art styles. Anyway, the junior employee was in the middle of talking about this with others when a manager at the office, identified only as a man in his 50s, overheard. He hadn't yet read the latest chapters of Oshinoko and was apparently so angry about the spoilers that he flew into a rage, one that ended with him grabbing his subordinate by the chest and kicking him in the torso. Although the younger employee wasn't really injured, the manager's behavior was still unhinged enough that it was understandably reported to both higher-ups at the office and the police. The 50-something-year-old was apparently transferred after this and is currently facing assault charges. At the time of this recording, the case still has yet to go to court. The repeated theft of mobile phones and other valuable items was apparently child's play for one suspect this week. Well, that was until Thai authorities learned that the woman in question wasn't actually a child. The whole thing began sometime this week when a 43-year-old man named Sakorn Ploipan walked into his local police station in Muang Nantaburi district. The man said that he was there to file a report about a theft that had taken place that day. Someone had stolen a bunch of items belonging to his wife, including her phone, car keys, jewelry, and a wallet. Luckily, the phone was still active, and police were able to trace the device to a hotel in the area. That's where they discovered their suspect, Chutaman Sihanouk, who was staying in one of the business's rooms. While Chutaman was undeniably in possession of the stolen items, initially it seemed like police weren't going to be able to do much about the situation. She said that she was only 13 years old, meaning that she would be subject to minimal criminal responsibility. However, when police did a little digging, they realized that this was a complete lie. Chutaman was actually 28 years old, and she knew exactly what she was doing. According to police, Chutaman is an experienced thief, one who was wanted in connection with several other theft cases, but had previously managed to evade capture. Disturbingly, at the time she was arrested this week, the 28-year-old had allegedly been using the cell phone she stole from Sakorn's wife to pose as her and reach out to several people and ask for money. One of these people was Sakorn's employer, who agreed to send 5,000 baht, or about $135 US, after Chutaman pretended that Sakorn's daughter was in the hospital. The employer almost sent the money, though thankfully it appears police caught the 28-year-old in time. According to reports, Chutaman sobbed constantly following her arrest this week, and it was easy to see how she was able to use her young-looking features to fool authorities in the past. This time it didn't work, though, and she is now expected to face multiple theft-related charges. A 54-year-old British woman has been sentenced this week, just over a year after she allegedly attacked her husband with a knife. A crime that took place after he fell asleep during the middle of a conversation, and she flew into a rage. According to reports, the incident took place one night back in April of last year, after husband and wife Barry and Deborah Stollard returned to their home in the village of Dymchurch, following a night out at a local pub. The couple of 21 years were sitting and relaxing together when Deborah started talking about some issues that she was experiencing in her personal life. She had only gotten part of the way into her story, though, when she looked over and discovered that Barry had fallen asleep. Though it's easy to see how Deborah might have felt slighted by this, she apparently skipped annoyed and went straight to unhinged. After throwing several items at her husband, she reportedly grabbed a knife and stabbed him in the chest. Barry ended up requiring emergency medical treatment, though thankfully there was no damage to his lungs or other organs, and he made a full recovery. Deborah, meanwhile, was arrested and charged with wounding with intent and criminal damage. She was also prohibited from living with Barry afterwards to ensure his safety. This week, the 54-year-old pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of unlawful wounding, though claimed that the situation wasn't entirely her fault. Her reason? She was going through menopause at the time of the stabbing. In a statement to the court, her lawyer said in part, quote, "It was, in my submission, the menopause and the hormonal effect that created that was the main cause of this event." In fairness to Deborah, it appears that Barry agrees with this explanation. In his own statement to the court this week, he asked the judge to spare his wife jail time, saying, quote, "The incident was a one-off. It was created by the two of us drinking alcohol and my wife suffering with the menopause." He also went on to state that the court-ordered bail restrictions imposed on Deborah that required them to live apart had actually made their lives more difficult, saying, quote, "There is no reason for this to continue. I request that my wife is not given a prison sentence and that we can live together as a happily married couple again." While the judge appeared sympathetic to Barry's statement, Deborah also had a previous conviction for assault occasioning actual bodily harm. Partly for this reason, she was given a 9-month jail sentence, though it was suspended for 2 years. In addition, Deborah was given 12 months of probation, ordered to complete 100 hours of community service, and must take part in 20 rehabilitation activity requirement sessions. Authorities in Thailand's Chiang Rai province say that they are investigating quite the strange theft case this week, after a man was caught on surveillance video stealing a bunch of underwear while he himself was wearing very little clothing. According to reports, the bizarre incident took place at around 6 a.m. on May 8th, when a 44-year-old man named Sompap was at his home in Muang Chiang Rai district. He was just about to make breakfast when he heard what sounded like a car pulling up outside. Because of a foot injury, Sompap wasn't able to get to his front door right away. By the time he made it outside, the car was gone. As it turned out, so were 8 pairs of his underwear that he had left out there to dry. Since Sompap had a surveillance camera that recorded the exterior of his property, he decided to go and have a look at what it had captured. When he reviewed the footage, he was pretty surprised by what he found. His underwear had been stolen by an unknown man who was also only dressed in underwear at the time. Annoyed and likely very confused, Sompap posted the footage to Facebook asking if anyone in the area knew this man. It wasn't long before the perpetrator reached out himself to confess. While the man's name wasn't released in any of the reports we came across, apparently the man claimed that the whole thing had been a dare. His friend who was with him in the car had dared him to steal the underwear, and for some reason he decided to do it. Following this admission, the man agreed to meet Sompap at a local police station to discuss things further. He also apparently offered to give the underwear back, though Sompap said that he would prefer to just buy new ones, which, is pretty understandable, I think. Anyway, at the time of this recording, it's unclear what, if any, charges the underwear thief will be facing. Authorities in the Belgian city of Antwerp say that a disgraced entrepreneur is in trouble with the law once again this week, after he was allegedly caught violating the terms of his house arrest following a harebrained scheme that involved attaching his court-ordered ankle monitor to his dog. According to reports, 35-year-old Ladislas Leys was once a big name in Belgium's food and nightlife space. After opening a series of ambitious luxury restaurants in some of the country's biggest cities that were known for their innovative concepts, the entrepreneur generated a lot of media attention around himself beginning around 2017. However, when the buzz died down, so did the cash that Leys was bringing in. The situation led to a series of contentious bankruptcy proceedings in which the 35-year-old repeatedly defrauded his creditors. While he was ultimately convicted of charges related to this and ordered to repay nearly 300,000 euros, that wasn't the end of the implosion of his reputation. Near the end of 2023, he was also convicted of sexually assaulting a 19-year-old student. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison for this, though most of the sentence was suspended and he was allowed to serve his time under house arrest. It seems that the slap on the wrist only confirmed in Leys' mind that he was above the law, because a couple of weeks ago he apparently pushed his luck even further. According to police, despite being under house arrest, the 35-year-old decided to attend a 3-day dance festival in the province of Limburg called Extrema Outdoor, in order to trick police into thinking that he was still at home. Before leaving for the festival earlier this month, he allegedly cut off his ankle monitor and attached it to his British bulldog. Of course, police were not fooled. The monitor alerted them to suspicious activity, and it was discovered that Leys was not home when police went to check on him at his residence. Even if the plan with the ankle monitor had somehow worked, though, it's likely that the 35-year-old's brazen activity on social media would have given everything away. Apparently, he was posting stories of himself at the festival to his Instagram page regularly while he was there. Realizing at some point that he was busted, Leys turned himself into police on May 20th, presumably after the festival was over. At the time of this recording, the 35-year-old is still in custody, though it remains to be seen whether he will now be forced to serve the rest of his sentence in prison or whether he will be granted house arrest once again. Authorities in Thailand's Chonburi province say that a Hong Kong man was high on more than life this week when he allegedly smashed his car into an electrical pole, then decided to spend some quality time with his pets instead of trying to get to safety. According to reports, the whole thing began at around 10:45 p.m. on May 23rd, when police in Banglamong district were called about a vehicle collision. A man, later identified only as a 27-year-old Hong Kong national, had driven into an electrical pole on a local road. There were concerns that he might be seriously injured because no one had seen the driver exit the vehicle. However, when police and rescue workers arrived at the scene, they were surprised to find the 27-year-old completely unfazed by what had happened. Despite the crash being forceful enough to set the airbags off in his car, the man appeared to be having the time of his life. He was cuddling with a cat and dog that were with him inside and had a huge smile glued to his face. It was clear that the man was under the influence of something because he completely ignored questions and refused to leave the vehicle. In the end, he had to be forcefully removed, though was apparently still smiling at police the whole time. Eventually, police spoke with a 23-year-old friend of the man's who was able to shine a little bit of light on what was going on. The man explained that he and the 27-year-old had been smoking weed with a bunch of their other friends, and that the 27-year-old in particular had gotten quite high. At some point, he said he was going to drive back to the place that they were staying. Concerned because of how intoxicated his friend was, the 23-year-old had followed him and had eventually found him parked in the middle of a road blocking traffic. The 23-year-old tried to convince the 27-year-old to let him take him the rest of the way, but he refused, driving off once again. He had only made it a short distance further before hitting the electrical pole. Immediately following the incident, the 27-year-old was taken into custody, though it's unclear whether he will be facing any charges. Representatives from the police service of Northern Ireland say that a couple of their officers were left speechless this week after they drove home an intoxicated woman, only to discover minutes later that she had gotten behind the wheel almost immediately afterwards and caused a crash. The whole thing began sometime in the early morning hours of June 2nd, when the PSNI officers in question were on patrol in the town of Portadown. They were driving along when they spotted a woman who was clearly drunk and walking alone. Concerned for her safety, they offered her a ride home, making sure that she got into her house before heading back out. It seemed like a job well done until about 15 minutes later, when the officers were called about a vehicle collision in the same area. When they arrived at the scene, they were stunned to find the same woman that they had just dropped off slumped over the wheel of a white BMW. Evidently, after being dropped at home, the woman had decided to go out for a late-night drive and had almost immediately slammed into another car. The woman, who has not been identified by name at the time of this recording, was given a breathalyzer test where she unsurprisingly blew over 3 times above the legal limit for alcohol. Thankfully, no one was hurt as a result of the crash, though the woman was arrested and is now awaiting charges. In a post to social media this week, PSNI representatives wrote in part, quote, "We cannot stress the message enough. Never ever drink and drive, or this could be the consequences of your actions. If you ever find yourself in a position where you are considering getting behind the wheel of a car after a few drinks, think about this. Could you live with the guilt if you seriously hurt or kill someone else using the road?" Authorities in the Chinese city of Shanghai say that they were able to solve a burglary case in record time recently after the alleged culprit made the bizarre choice to leave behind a note at the crime scene that included his contact information. According to reports, the whole thing started sometime on the morning of May 17th when employees at a building in the city's Pudong New area arrived at work to find that they had been the victims of a crime. Someone had broken into their offices and some equipment as well as other items was clearly missing. When police were called to the scene, things quickly took a strange turn when they found a notebook that didn't belong to any of the workers. It had been left on a desk with several computers stacked on top of it. Upon looking in the notebook, officers were met with quite the surprise. Inside was a message that had been left behind by the perpetrator. It read in part, quote, "Hello, boss. You need to improve your security." The culprit had gone on to write that they had stolen a watch, a computer, and other valuables. However, they claimed that they only really wanted cash and were willing to give the items back for the right price. At the bottom of the letter was a number to call in case the victims were interested. Apparently, the burglar really didn't think this through, though, because it seems he used his actual number, not a burner phone. Using this, as well as surveillance footage from the crime scene that allegedly showed the suspect scaling a wall on the property, police were able to identify him as a man by the last name of Sang. Sang was arrested that same day by 2:30 p.m. All of the stolen items were recovered, and Sang now remains in custody on suspicion of theft. Representatives from Spain's national police say that a 26-year-old German tourist has been arrested this week following an idiotic incident in which he allegedly tried to steal an expensive piece of construction equipment while drunk, only to crash it moments later, injuring himself and seriously damaging the vehicle in the process. The whole thing began sometime on June 9th, when police received calls from the owner of a local quarry on the island of Majorca. The owner explained that they had just been contacted by some of their neighbors who stated that a young German man had come to them suffering from injuries and claiming that he had been messing around down at the active dig site. The owner had gone to check the situation out, where they found their 25-ton wheel loader overturned at the side of one of the quarry roads and partially hanging over into a ravine. When officers arrived at the scene, they were able to speak to the 26-year-old German suspect, who was in the country on vacation. He was apparently drunk, covered in blood from injuries he had sustained, and admitted to sneaking into the quarry. According to police, after climbing the perimeter fence at the site, the man found the keys to the wheel loader and allegedly attempted to drive off with it. However, in his intoxicated state, he had made it less than 80 yards before getting into an accident and flipping the piece of heavy machinery on its side. While the 26-year-old was quickly treated for his injuries, the situation with the wheel loader wasn't so straightforward. The crash apparently did major damage to the vehicle and caused engine oil to leak out all over the road. The owner of the wheel loader went as far as to claim in local news reports that the thing had been entirely destroyed and that they would likely have to buy a new one due to a lack of available spare parts. The wheel loader is reportedly valued at between 300 and 350,000 euros, or about $325,000 to $380,000 US. As for the German tourist, he has now been arrested on property damage crimes and reportedly remains in custody. Authorities in the Thai capital of Bangkok say that they arrested a suspected drug dealer with a rather bizarre and flawed MO this week, after she was apparently found to be using mute couriers to distribute her illegal products, believing that they wouldn't be able to identify her if they were caught. According to reports, the whole thing started sometime last month, when police in Bangkok's Yanawa district were tipped off about a local drug gang. Witnesses said that the group was pretty unique and identifiable for one specific reason. All of the couriers, the street-level people who actually sold and delivered the drugs, were deaf and mute, meaning they were unable to speak. The alleged leader of the group was a 53-year-old woman named Payun. For some reason, Payun apparently believed that by hiring mute couriers, she was protecting herself, reasoning that if any of them were caught, they wouldn't be able to pass along information about her to police. Of course, as you may have already noticed, there was an obvious flaw in her logic. After launching an investigation, officers from the Investigation Division of the Metropolitan Bureau organized an undercover drug buy from one of Payun's couriers, a man identified as Patarsan. After Patarsan allegedly sold meth to an officer, he was arrested, at which point he was taken in for questioning. He almost immediately pointed authorities in Payun's direction. You see, while Patarsan may have been mute, he wasn't illiterate. He just wrote down the information for police instead of saying it to them. Payun was arrested last week on June 6th. It's unclear why Payun thought that mute people just couldn't communicate at all. In fact, what makes the case even stranger is that apparently she's hard of hearing herself. So, you think she would kind of have a tiny bit of insight into her courier's disabilities, to say the very least. Anyway, Payun now claims that she isn't the mastermind behind the drug scheme, and that there are two much more powerful people who actually supply the drugs and forced her and others to sell them. However, so far she has reportedly refused to give up these names, citing fears for her safety. Police say that they are now investigating this new lead, but in the meantime, Payun remains in custody. Authorities on the island nation of Singapore say that a 36-year-old man has been sentenced to jail time this week after he repeatedly ran out on bills from a number of dental clinics by using the same grade school level scheme. According to reports, the man in question, 36-year-old Ryosuke Tanaka, pulled the bizarre stunt no fewer than 7 times at 6 different dental clinics. Each time it went the same way. He would show up at the business and receive their services. However, when it came time to pay, he would ask to use the bathroom. Upon excusing himself, he would immediately run away. I should point out that this wasn't just for run-of-the-mill cleanings either. Tanaka almost exclusively did this with expensive procedures like tooth extractions, x-rays, root canals, and crown treatments. It's no surprise, therefore, that in just these 7 cases alone, he apparently stole the equivalent of over $4,700 in services. These are just the incidents he was charged over, though. Police say that between 2020 and 2022, Tanaka did this to at least 3 other dental clinics, racking up another $2,200 at least in additional unpaid bills. Though Tanaka did plead guilty to multiple charges of cheating this week, it wasn't before he apparently tried to offer some pretty lame excuses for his actions. Perhaps the most ridiculous of these was that he never actually intended to leave the dental clinics without paying, and assumed that he'd be billed through the mail. You know, after he specifically ran out on the bills. Understandably, the court rejected these arguments, as well as a point from the 36-year-old's lawyer who argued that there was no real level of planning or sophistication behind what he did. The judge responded that the crimes might not have been sophisticated, but all of them were clearly premeditated, since Tanaka had asked to go to the bathroom specifically when he was asked for payment. In addition to paying over $7,000 in restitution this week, Tanaka was also sentenced to 5 months in jail. It seems that he got off fairly easy, though, considering that the maximum penalty for his charges was 10 years, as well as a fine. A young Colombian man offered a tearful apology over social media this week, days after a bizarre and viral incident in which he stole a medal that had been awarded to a professional soccer player during the middle of a celebration, while the entire thing was being broadcast on live TV. According to reports, the whole thing began at the end of last week, when the soccer team, Atlético Bucaramanga, won Colombia's Categoria Primera A title. This was apparently a historic achievement for the team, marking the first time they had taken the title in the 75 years since they had been founded. Understandably, as a result, spirits were pretty high in the city of Bucaramanga, with thousands of fans coming out after the final match to take part in a celebration that was held for the team back in their home stadium. As part of that celebration, the club's players were awarded medals by the city's mayor as well as other government officials. It was shortly after this that the wild incident took place. As the players greeted excited fans and gave interviews to the media, one man took advantage of the festivities to seize quite the brazen memento. Apparently realizing that the athletes were distracted, the man ran right up behind central defender Carlos Henao and stole his medal right off his neck. While the man was able to escape given all of the confusion, unfortunately for him, there was something he had overlooked. There were TV cameras everywhere that were broadcasting live, at least one of which captured the theft as it unfolded. When reporters and fans alike realized this, the footage was spread everywhere online, where it quickly went viral. It didn't take long for the thief to be identified as a local young man named Sebastian Luna. While Luna initially tried to claim he'd done nothing wrong, his tune apparently started to change once his name began being publicized everywhere. Soccer isn't exactly known for having the most tolerant or reasonable fans after all, and Luna and his family quickly began to fear violent repercussions. Luna returned the stolen medal and on June 18th offered a tear-filled public apology in a video made by a comedian named Jose Ordóñez. In the video, Luna apologized to many people, organizations, and groups, including the team, his fellow fans, his family, the bar he frequents, his mother, and the entire nation of Colombia. It appears that most people are now taking pity on Luna, as while he was initially arrested, it's been reported that he has since been released and that no charges will be pressed. However, he will be entering a program for alcoholism on the advice of the mayor's office, as he was intoxicated at the time of the offense. Representatives from Australia's Victoria Police say that a man found himself in a Kentucky Fried bucket of trouble last week after he allegedly drove to his local fast food joint while drunk, only to immediately give himself away. According to reports, the whole thing started at around 9 p.m. on June 13th, when police were called by employees at a KFC restaurant in the Melbourne suburb of Doncaster. The workers said that they were pretty sure that one of their customers was driving under the influence and that officers might want to come and check it out. Now you're probably asking yourself, how did they know he was drunk? Well, it wasn't exactly subtle. Upon arriving at the location, the man apparently drove his Honda sedan the wrong way into the drive-thru, then promptly immobilized the vehicle on a curb. Unsurprisingly, when police arrived, the man tested positive for alcohol during a roadside breath test. He was arrested, and officers quickly also discovered that he didn't even have a license to drive. While the man has not been identified by name at the time of this recording, reports state that he is a 42-year-old from the nearby suburb of Templestowe Lower. So far, the man's vehicle has been impounded for 30 days, but he is expected to also face multiple traffic offenses. In a report released by Victoria Police about the incident entitled "Appetite Curbed in Doncaster," authorities took a bit of a joking tone, but nevertheless reminded the public not to drive under the influence. The report read in part, quote, "It took a lot more than a refresher towel to clean up the mess after the driver allegedly tested positive for alcohol during a roadside breath test. Unlike a certain 11 secret herbs and spices, drinking and driving are an original recipe for disaster." Authorities in Singapore say that a 31-year-old Malaysian man pleaded guilty to criminal charges this week following a bizarre and stomach-churning scheme involving squirting his own urine on women, which he evidently believed would be a good way to strike up conversations. The whole thing started a few months ago when the culprit, 31-year-old Tan Jun Hao, was looking to meet women. After apparently writing off all the normal ways one could go about this, he came up with possibly the world's worst and most disgusting icebreaker. Instead of joining a dating app, looking for singles events, or doing any number of reasonable things to achieve his goal, he filled a bottle with a mixture of flour and his own piss and decided to squirt it on young women who he found attractive. Here's how Tan apparently saw this going down in his mind. He'd spray his floury piss mixture on his would-be love interest, would alert the woman to her soiled clothing, and then after that, they'd somehow have a conversation. Now, there's obviously a lot of things wrong with this line of logic, but I think the thing that gets me the most is the idea that anyone would want to stop and chat after being told they were covered in a foul-smelling and mysterious liquid. Like, I can't imagine anyone thinking to themselves in that moment, "Hey, I'm covered in what appears to be some sort of piss slurry, but yeah, take my number. What an excellent meet cute." As if all of this wasn't ridiculous enough, Tan apparently only went through with the squirting part of the plan in the end. After spraying his female victims, he simply walked past them and never even tried to engage them in conversation. Not that this would have made it better, but I mean, still, what the hell, man? Anyway, Tan apparently did this to several women before he was finally caught for one of them on the evening of April 9th. In that case, the victim was sprayed as she was going up an escalator at a local metro station. It's unclear exactly how Tan was caught, though he was later identified and arrested. This week, the 31-year-old pleaded guilty to a count of using criminal force and was slapped with a $1,200 fine. People across the African nation of Ghana were led on quite the emotional roller coaster ride this week, after what started out as a celebration for a record-breaking achievement turned into a police investigation when it was discovered that the man behind the alleged feat had apparently been lying about the whole thing. It all started earlier this year when Ghanaian chef Ebenezer Smith, also known by the nickname Millennium Chef Smith, set out to accomplish an ambitious goal. The celebrity cook announced that he was going to attempt the Guinness World Record for the longest continuous cooking marathon done by an individual. In order to support the record, Smith raised funds from a number of sponsors. The main one ended up being Amadia Shopping Center, a mall located in the capital of Accra. The company not only provided the facilities for the stunt, they also gave him financial support. The whole thing kicked off on February 1st and was widely publicized across the country. It didn't end until more than a month later, with Smith announcing he had shattered the previous record and cooked for a whopping 802 hours and 25 minutes straight. This week, the story went viral again in the African nation when Smith held a press conference showing off the certificate for his achievement, which he said had just been given to him by Guinness World Records. The announcement was met with excitement and congratulations from people all over the country. There was just one problem. Apparently, Smith made the whole thing up. The shocking news was reported just a day later when an official spokesperson for Guinness World Records came out and said that Smith's claims were fraudulent. Not only had they never given him any certificate, they said that they had never even received an application that he was attempting to break the marathon cooking record. Things got even stranger when shortly after this revelation, it was announced that Smith had been arrested. According to local media, police took Smith into custody after his main sponsor, the Amadia Shopping Center, learned about what had happened and accused him of defrauding them. They say that the chef bilked them out of the equivalent of about $23,000 US between the resources they provided him and the direct financial support for his fake record attempt. At the time of this recording, Smith has not been officially charged with any crimes, though it appears that he has admitted to deceiving his sponsors and the public. One local media report we came across stated that Smith confessed that he had fabricated the Guinness World Record stunt as a way to make fast money. However, it's not clear if this has been confirmed. In retrospect, it seems like Smith's claims probably should have been put under greater scrutiny from the beginning. The previous record that he claimed he beat, which is still the actual official record at this time, is held by an Irishman named Alan Fisher, who cooked for 119 hours, 57 minutes, and 16 seconds. The record before that was held by a Nigerian woman named Hilda Bachi, whose record was 93 hours, 11 minutes. That means that Smith claimed to have dusted them both by about 700 hours. The situation is still developing. Authorities in the Thai province of Chachoengsao say that they are investigating a bizarre case this week after two farm laborers got into a violent dispute, a situation that apparently began as a drunken argument over their wives' genitals. According to reports, the whole thing began at around 9 p.m. on July 4th, when police in Muang Chachoengsao district were called about a potential stabbing attack. They arrived at the scene to find a 48-year-old man named Nyana, who was standing outside of a local grocery store and suffering from obvious knife wounds. Nyana had a 4-inch long gash on his head, a deep cut on his left arm, and his left ear was almost entirely severed. While the 48-year-old was taken to the hospital, police began conducting interviews and quickly came across a witness named Joy. Joy was able to give officers a complete rundown on the strange circumstances that had led up to the violent incident. Joy explained that he, Nyana, and several other people were all employees of a local duck farm. They lived in a temporary shelter in a field about 300 yards down the road, where they also drank together most nights after finishing work. That evening, he, Nyana, and another man, a 35-year-old Laotian national identified only by the name Nong, were throwing back a few shots of liquor when the topic of conversation got a little raunchy. Specifically, the men began to discuss whose wife had the biggest vagina. Now, as a Westerner, I have to admit that this is counterintuitive because I would not have expected that this was something to brag about. But apparently in this instance, the big vagina was the thing that everyone wanted. So much so that when Nyana and Nong both stated that their wives had the biggest vagina, and both men refused to back down from this claim, the game of one-upsmanship quickly got out of hand. Joy said that he didn't see the actual attack take place, but moments after he stepped away to pee, he heard screaming coming from back at the camp. This was Nyana, who not long after ran towards the grocery store for help. Nong, meanwhile, grabbed his possessions and fled. At the time of this recording, police say that they are still searching for Nong, who remains on the run. An off-duty New Zealand police officer is being applauded for his amusingly quick and decisive action this week, after he caught a man allegedly trying to steal an expensive basket of groceries from a business, and he shut him down so fast that the would-be thief was left looking visibly stunned. The whole thing happened on the morning of July 9th, when the off-duty policeman in question decided to make a brief stop on his way to work. He needed to pick up something for a fellow officer, so he drove to a Woolworths grocery store in the Auckland suburb of Henderson. Hilarious surveillance camera footage taken from the business shows what happened next. At the exact same time that the officer was walking into the store, a man in a hoodie was trying to head out the wrong way through the business's entrance. He was carrying one of the store's shopping baskets, which he had allegedly loaded with hundreds of dollars worth of meat and other products. Immediately cluing in that the man in the hoodie was attempting to shoplift, the off-duty officer grabbed the basket from the suspect's hands mid-stride and kept walking into the store. It all happened so fast that the would-be thief kind of just stood there in disbelief for a moment before leaving the store empty-handed. At the time of this recording, the suspect's name has not been released, though New Zealand police say that they know who he is and will be paying him a visit very shortly. A man in China may have single-handedly redefined the meaning of the term trouser snake last week after he tried to make it through a border crossing with his pants quite literally filled with live reptiles. The bizarre smuggling attempt was foiled sometime on July 9th, while the unidentified man was attempting to go from Hong Kong into mainland China at Shenzhen's Futian port. After arriving at the border crossing, the suspect got into the Green Line, which is supposed to be dedicated to travelers with nothing to declare. However, it turned out this couldn't have been further from the case. As China's General Administration of Customs wrote in a report about the incident, quote, "Upon inspection, customs officers found that the pockets of his trousers contained 6 canvas drawstring bags that were sealed with tape. Each bag contained multiple live snakes of various colors and shapes. Apparently, it wasn't just a few snakes either. According to officials, a total of 104 of the serpents were pulled from the man's pants, comprised of 5 different species. None of the species are native to China, and at least one is considered mildly venomous. As you might imagine, bringing a big old bag of non-native snakes into the country was not only frowned upon, it was also illegal. As a result, the male suspect is now looking at a prison sentence of up to 3 years, as well as a fine up to the equivalent of about $34,000 US. Okay, technically this next one isn't a crime per se, but it still did involve a legal dispute and penalties, and quite frankly, I just thought it was funny. A Chinese man quite literally paid the price for his spitefulness recently when he attempted to get cute with court officials during the repayment of a debt and ended up getting slapped with an additional fine for his antics. The whole thing started last September when the man in question, identified only by the last name Wan, failed to hold up his end of a court-ordered financial obligation. It's unclear exactly what this was for, but what we do know is that it was part of a settlement in which Wan agreed to pay a sum of money to another person by the last name Wang. Despite the agreement, Wan still refused to pay what he owed, so Wang initiated further legal action against him in March. This resulted in court-ordered mediation, where it was determined that Wan would pay Wang 20,000 yuan, or about $2,750 US. This time, Wan paid half the sum up front, promising to pay the remainder within 2 days. However, when the day arrived for Wan to make good on the rest of the debt, the case took yet another unexpected turn. You see, Wan did show up with the money, only it was in a bunch of huge bags containing loose change. According to reports, one of those bags contained over 2,000 10-cent coins. It took bank officials nearly 3 hours to count everything, at the end of which they discovered that Juan was still short. At least 1,400 yuan worth of the coins were also apparently damaged and could not be accepted. For wasting the court's time, Juan was slapped with an additional 2,000 yuan fine on top of the money he already owed. Now you might be thinking to yourself, gee, that's not fair. Maybe Juan only had coins to pay with. Well, apparently that's not the case. We know this because when he was slapped with the additional fine, Juan paid the full sum that day, suggesting that the whole bag of coins routine really was just spite all along. A 54-year-old Thai man foiled himself, or should I say, soiled himself this week, after he allegedly attempted to carry out a bizarre home invasion while extremely drunk, a crime that allegedly ended with him defecating in his pants while being arrested by police. The whole thing took place sometime recently, when a 54-year-old woman named Sun Tree was eating dinner at her residence in Nong Han district in the province of Udon Thani. Sun Tree lived with her husband and their child. However, on this particular evening she was alone because both of them were away for work. She was in the middle of her meal when suddenly something caught her attention. It was her dog, who was barking aggressively outside. She checked her security cameras and, to her horror, discovered that a man was outside climbing over the fence into her yard. Upon making it onto the property, the man began removing his clothes. Understandably terrified, Suntree began yelling for help, managing to get the attention of several neighbors who ran to her aid. In the meantime, the suspect fled into a storage room at the residence. However, the neighbors were able to find him and tie him up with rope until police could arrive. When officers got to the scene, they discovered that the suspect had been identified. It turned out that Suntree actually knew him. He was part of a construction team who had worked at her residence 7 years earlier. The man was 54 years old, and his name was Mai. Officers attempted to speak with Mai. However, he was uncooperative and pretended to be unconscious. After realizing that he was likely very drunk, police forced him into some clothing and prepared to take him down to the station. As they were getting ready to take Mai to their vehicle, though, one of the officers noticed something truly disgusting. The 54-year-old had shit himself, and it was all over some of their hands. The officers cleaned themselves off before continuing with the arrest. During a subsequent interview, Mai reportedly admitted to drinking heavily with a friend before committing the attempted home invasion. However, he said he didn't know why he had actually tried to commit the crime, nor why he had removed his clothing. The 54-year-old was charged with trespassing at night and is now facing a possible sentence of up to 5 years in prison, a fine equating to about $2,800 US, or both. A 33-year-old Indian man reportedly found himself in hot water on more than one front recently, after he allegedly tampered with his passport as part of an ill-considered plan to hide his previous travel history from his wife. The whole thing took place sometime last week when the man in question, logistics operator Tushar Pawar, arrived at Mumbai International Airport. The 33-year-old was traveling with a client and was supposed to be headed for Bangkok, Thailand. However, his plans took a major detour as soon as immigration officials got a look at his passport. Upon closer inspection, they discovered that several of the pages were glued together, while others had been replaced entirely. When asked about this, Pawar did not have a satisfactory explanation. The truth eventually came out, though, when the 33-year-old apparently admitted that he had deliberately tampered with his passport in a bid to hide his travel history from his wife. Specifically, a number of trips that he had taken to Thailand with his friends in 2023 and 2024. Well, he may have temporarily been able to get away with lying to his wife, but unfortunately for Pawar, it now looks like he's been thoroughly busted. Not only was his ridiculous scheme exposed, but tampering with a passport is illegal, so he was also arrested on charges of violating the country's Passport Act. Unfortunately, sources don't mention what kind of legal penalties the 33-year-old could be facing, but whatever happens, I imagine on top of it, he's going to be getting an earful from his wife when he finally gets home. If you're a regular viewer of our Crimes of the Week International series, then you might remember a story out of Singapore that we covered at the end of last month. Well, I say you might remember it. It's pretty hard to forget. It was about that guy who was arrested for squirting women with a mixture of his own piss and flour because he believed it would be a good way to strike up conversations with them. Well, unfortunately, as bizarre as that story was, it now appears that the idea wasn't all that unique. It seems that this idiot has a kindred spirit in Japan, one who made news this week after police released details of his similarly harebrained scheme. According to reports, it all began sometime in May of 2023, when the 25-year-old suspect, who has not been identified by name, walked up to a woman in her 30s on the streets of Nagoya. After asking the woman for directions, the suspect allegedly squirted liquid glue into her hair. He then tried to play this off like a bird had pooped on her and that he was going to help her. Unfortunately, this man was no master at sleight of hand, and the woman picked up on what he had done immediately. She alerted police, and he was quickly arrested. Things got even more ridiculous, though, when police began questioning the 25-year-old and asked him what the hell he was doing. That's when he apparently confessed that not only had he done this about 10 other times to women in the previous 2 months, but that his goal with the whole bird poop charade was, quote, getting an opportunity to pick them up. You know, because who doesn't feel like some romance after thinking that they've just been covered in bird shit? It appears that police weren't the only ones with questions after news about the strange crime was finally released this week. Reactions on Japanese social media included comments such as, quote, did he imagine she would be grateful if he picked the bird poop out with his hands? And, quote, what a gross idea. At least one commenter even offered the man some joking advice, stating, quote, he should have added a little roasted seaweed to complete the illusion. According to police, the 25-year-old is now facing assault charges. Authorities in the Indian state of Rajasthan say that they received quite the unusual confession from a suspect last week after he was arrested following a terrifying attack at an elementary school and claimed that he had only done it to prove that he was still alive. The disturbing incident took place sometime on July 19th when the suspect in question, Baburam Bill, walked into the Chuli Baradharana school in the city of Balotra. Armed with a knife and a bottle of gasoline, Bill proceeded to take several teachers and students hostage. By the time police arrived and were able to take Bill into custody, he had allegedly stabbed 3 of the victims, identified as the acting school headmaster, a teacher, and a parent. The 2 school staff members were hospitalized with serious injuries. While the situation was understandably very serious, the whole thing got a lot stranger when police questioned Bill and he revealed the motive behind the shocking crime. The man claimed that he had only carried out the attack because he was trying to prove to the government that he was alive. According to Bill, his problem started a little while ago when he received a death certificate in his own name at his home in Mithora village. Bill claimed that he tried to get the error corrected several times, but no matter what he did, government officials wouldn't listen. Fearing that they would confiscate his property because they considered him dead, Bill decided he needed to take drastic measures. Apparently, the attack on the school wasn't even the first thing he had tried. Bill allegedly committed several other crimes, stating that he hoped that once he was arrested, authorities would be forced to recognize and correct their error. It's unclear what these other crimes were, but it seems that they were not effective in getting the attention that he required. Of course, that has changed now, as Bill's name and face are all over the news. Unfortunately for him, he's also now looking at some serious charges. In the meantime, authorities say that they are looking into his claims about the erroneous death certificate. Over the course of this series, we've covered some truly stupid motives for murder. However, this next story might just be the dumbest one we've come across yet. Authorities on the Indonesian island of Sulawesi say that a man is facing murder charges this week after he was accused of brutally stabbing his friend to death during an argument that allegedly started over a grade school riddle. The whole thing took place sometime on July 24th, when the victim, 47-year-old Kadir Marcus, traveled to the suspect's home in Tongkuno district. He had apparently traveled there to repay a debt. However, after handing over the money, the men decided to have a few drinks. That's when the suspect, identified only by the initials DR, began posing a series of riddles. While it's unclear what most of these riddles were, we definitely know what one of them was, because it allegedly launched a fatal argument. It began when DR asked Marcus one that we're probably all familiar with. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Apparently, the men disagreed on the answer to the paradoxical question, prompting tensions to flare. With the added alcohol in the mix, things quickly spiraled out of control. Though it appears that Marcus attempted to leave his friend's house, DR was allegedly so incensed by the argument that he chased him down. Once he caught his friend, DR reportedly stabbed him repeatedly with a type of dagger known as a badik until Marcus was dead. Police quickly arrested DR and were able to retrieve the weapon. DR has now been charged with murder and is looking at up to 18 years in prison if convicted. Authorities in the Russian Republic of Dagestan say that they are investigating the aftermath of a wild and dangerous scandal in the world of professional chess after a player was allegedly caught red-handed trying to poison her longtime rival. The whole thing took place on August 2nd during the Dagestan Chess Championship. Shortly after sitting down to play a game, one of the competitors, 30-year-old Umayganat Osmanova, began feeling strangely. There was a strong metallic taste in her mouth, followed by intense nausea and dizziness. Osmanova received medical attention and thankfully was okay. However, she quickly told officials at the event something else that sent up red flags. Around the same time that she had started feeling sick, she noticed what looked like tiny metal balls falling from her chessboard. When officials reviewed surveillance video of the room where the matches were held, they couldn't believe what they saw. In the footage, another player, 43-year-old Amina Abakarova, could be seen walking into the space ahead of time. She puts down a bag before heading over to the chessboard where Osmanova was going to be playing. Seconds later, she can be seen brushing something onto the board and some of the pieces before walking away. This footage was immediately handed over to police, who now say that the substance Abakarova put on Osmanova's chessboard was mercury. She allegedly cracked open an old thermometer and planned to use the heavy metal to knock her longtime rival out of the competition. During a confession following her arrest, Abakarova reportedly told investigators that she had carried out the poisoning because Osmanova said, quote, nasty things about her and her relatives behind her back. Despite the serious dangers associated with mercury poisoning, she claimed that she only intended to scare the 30-year-old and wanted her out of the competition. Unfortunately for Abakarova, it seems that her plan was a failure by pretty much every metric. Not only is she now facing up to 3 years in prison and a lifetime ban from professional chess, Osmanova still felt well enough to continue on after receiving medical treatment. She finished the tournament in second place, taking one of the top prizes. Authorities in the Malaysian state of Terengganu say that a 65-year-old man is in hot water both legally and domestically after he allegedly reported a fake crime to police to try and avoid an argument with his wife, and the whole thing spectacularly blew up in his face. The incident began on August 10th when the man, identified only as a 65-year-old security guard, called police to say that he had been robbed. The man explained that he had been on his way home when he stopped at a gas station in the town of Kijal. While there, he used an ATM to take out 1,100 Malaysian ringgits, or about $240 US. He got back in his car and had only traveled a short distance when he claimed that he had come across 2 Rohingyan men who asked for his help. One of the men said that he needed to get his friend to a local clinic. The security guard stated that he had just stepped out of his vehicle to investigate when one of the men pulled out a machete and pointed it at him. They then robbed him of the money that he had just withdrawn, which he said was the entirety of his recent paycheck. After hearing the report, police launched an investigation. However, it wasn't long before the 65-year-old admitted that he had made the whole thing up. He had never been robbed. Instead, he had spent all of the money he claimed was stolen and was simply afraid to tell his wife. Well, apparently the man now has even more to worry about, as in addition to likely getting reamed out at home, he's under investigation for giving false information to police. At the time of this recording, he still has yet to face formal charges. Authorities in Auckland, New Zealand say that they are working to contact dozens of people and are trying to track down the source of an illicit shipment after a local food bank accidentally distributed hundreds of candies that turned out to be laced with methamphetamine. The whole thing began in mid-July when the organization in question, Auckland City Mission, received a large box of pineapple candies as part of their donations. The candies were pre-packaged, fully wrapped, and appeared to have been manufactured by Malaysian food company Rinda. As a result, bags of the candies were distributed to those who used the food bank. Unfortunately, what no one apparently knew was that the candy had been tampered with. The true scope of the situation was only revealed earlier this month when Auckland City Mission began receiving phone calls from people who had received the candies as part of their food packages. Several described the sweets as having a revolting taste to the point that they had spit them out immediately. This ended up being a good thing, too, because after the foul taste was verified by workers at the mission, the candies were sent off for testing, revealing an unsettling truth. They had been tampered with many of them containing up to 3 grams each of meth. According to reports, this is many times the average dose, and could have been potentially fatal to anyone ingesting it. Thankfully, it appears that while a couple of people were hospitalized as a result of the candies, no one was seriously injured. All the same, the obvious question was, how had this happened? So far, the exact cause remains a mystery, though a company spokesman for Rinda stated that they do not directly export goods to New Zealand. Authorities have suggested that the most likely situation is that someone unwittingly gave the sweets to the charity without realizing what was inside, as each one of the candies had an estimated street value of roughly $600 US. According to the latest available reports, so far the Auckland City Mission have reached out to roughly 400 people who may have unknowingly received the candies. At least 41 candies have been recovered, though many more are still unaccounted for. There's nothing like a good book, am I right? Something you can really immerse yourself in and just completely lose track of time. Well, according to police, that's precisely what happened to one man in Italy. The problem was the book he was reading didn't belong to him. Neither did the home he was reading in, for that matter. Apparently, the whole thing took place one night recently when the suspect, identified only as a 38-year-old man, broke into the apartment of a 71-year-old in Rome's Prati district. The 38-year-old was allegedly there with the intention of burglarizing the place. However, he didn't get very far before something caught his eye. It was a book which was sitting on a bedside table. The 38-year-old picked it up and reportedly ended up getting quite distracted, so much so that he sat there reading until the 71-year-old homeowner woke up and stumbled across the bizarre scene playing out inside his home. Upon being confronted, the 38-year-old ran and escaped out the same way he came in. Unfortunately for him, though, he didn't make it very far before he was arrested by police. At the time, he was apparently in possession of a bag of expensive clothing that he had allegedly stolen from another residence earlier that night. If you're wondering what book was so tantalizing that the accused thief couldn't put it down, it's called The Gods at 6 O'Clock by Giovanni Nucci. The book explains the Iliad by the famous Greek poet Homer from the perspective of the gods. It seems the author was quite tickled by the whole thing when news of the strange story broke. He told reporters during an interview, quote, "I'd like to find the person caught red-handed and give him the book, because he'll have been arrested halfway through reading it. I'd like him to be able to finish it." Though the man's name has not been released, it would arguably be a perfect time for Nucci to track him down. After all, if he's convicted of theft and burglary charges, he'll likely have a lot more time for reading in the near future. Authorities in the Austrian province of Styria say that a neurosurgeon, a doctor, and at least 5 other medical personnel are under investigation this week, following a truly insane accusation that they allegedly allowed a 13-year-old girl to take part in an operation earlier this year. According to reports, the operation in question happened on January 13th after the victim, a 33-year-old man identified only by the name Gregor R., arrived at Graz University Hospital, located in the city of the same name. Gregor had suffered a serious head injury, one that required him to undergo surgery. During those proceedings, it's now alleged that the 13-year-old daughter of the neurosurgeon in charge of the operation was allowed to drill into Gregor's head. While the neurosurgeon in question, along with at least one other doctor, have since been fired, what's truly unbelievable is that all of this took several months to come to light. Even then, Gregor only found out about what had happened through media reports. Police didn't even tell him they were investigating until July. It's now been revealed that the surgeon, the doctor, and 5 other medics are under criminal investigation for serious bodily harm. As you might imagine, Gregor has since hired a lawyer, and they are currently in the process of taking legal action. They say that they never received any kind of contact from the hospital, no explanation, and definitely no apology. As if the situation couldn't get any wilder, it appears that the hospital have taken a sort of fuck you approach to the whole thing. In response to a statement by Gregor's lawyer, they said, quote, "Contact was not made because the patient joined the criminal proceedings as a private party and is therefore a party to the criminal proceedings. The operation was carried out without complications. Finally, we would like to state that we are very sorry about the incident and are committed to fully clarifying the matter." I guess technically they threw in a little apology at the end there, but otherwise that statement is pretty unhinged. They basically said that they never tried to tell Gregor what had happened because he was part of the investigation, and then casually dropped that the operation was successful. Gregor and his lawyer say that they acknowledge that the drilling during the surgery was necessary and that the operation was a success, but that's also not really the point. The point is that they let a middle schooler drill into his skull. Unless we find out later the kid's name was Doogie Howser, I have a feeling the hospital is going to have a tough time arguing this one in court. If you're a regular viewer of our Crimes of the Week International series, then you might remember that back in May we brought you a wild story out of Singapore. One about a man who attempted to frame his wife for drug crimes by planting marijuana in her vehicle. Well, that case has since gone to court, revealing a flood of ridiculous new details this week. We decided we had to share them with you because somehow this story is even stupider than we initially thought. Okay, so if you'll recall, the whole thing began at around 5:40 a.m. on October 17th, 2023, when the culprit, 37-year-old Tan Xiang Long, broke into his wife's car, which was inside of a multi-level parking garage in the city-state's Punggol residential area. Once inside, he pulled out a bag of what he thought was more than 500 grams of marijuana, which he proceeded to place in a middle compartment area of the rear passenger seats. Remember that 500 number, because we're going to come back to it in a moment. Anyway, after that, Tan fled, believing it was only a matter of time before his wife was arrested. He was right about this, but not in the way he'd imagined. Again, we'll get back to that in a moment. But first, you're probably wondering, why the hell was Tan doing this in the first place? Well, I'm glad you asked. So, according to newly released reports, Tan and his wife had been married in February of 2021. However, their marriage had quickly soured. Eventually, they decided they would separate, but because of a Singapore law that doesn't allow couples to divorce unless they have been together for at least 3 years, they were going to have to wait. This was apparently too much for Tan, who was angry because he felt that his wife, quote, had not contributed much to their marriage. He was also convinced that she was having an affair, something that is pretty rich when you consider that we now know that Tan himself had a girlfriend at the time. He even hired a private investigator to spy on his wife, though couldn't find any evidence she was being unfaithful. Still convinced that he needed to expedite his divorce, Tan reportedly came up with another idea. He figured the court might make an exception for him if it turned out that his wife was a criminal. Again, just like with the infidelity, he decided to do the very thing he was accusing her of, and decided to plant drugs in her car, specifically at least 500 grams of marijuana. This is especially evil because it's the minimum amount required to get the death penalty in Singapore for drug trafficking. So yeah, Tan was doing this knowing full well his wife might be executed if police fell for the scheme. Luckily, as you might have already gathered, Tan is a idiot. Not only did the 37-year-old brag to his girlfriend that he had come up with the, quote, perfect crime numerous times over text, he basically laid out his whole plan. He went on to explain that he was going to purchase a brick of weed over Telegram, and even stated he was confident the scheme would not be linked back to him. After purchasing the drugs for approximately $2,000 US, money, I should point out, he borrowed from a friend because he was in debt, Tan managed to secure the drugs. As I mentioned previously, he then broke into his wife's car and left the weed inside. What Tan didn't know, though, was that his wife's vehicle was equipped with a camera, one that alerted her to a possible collision when he broke inside. She called police and was initially arrested when they found the marijuana, though it quickly became clear something weird was going on once they saw the footage recorded by the camera. In the meantime, Tan had returned home completely oblivious to all of this. However, when he told his girlfriend what he had done, she understandably said that it was a terrible idea and that he needed to go back there and try to get the drugs out of his wife's car. Tan listened, unaware that he was walking into a police investigation. He was caught and tried to offer a lame excuse about what he was doing there, but police didn't buy it. The rest of the idiotic scheme unraveled from there. There's actually one last ridiculous twist to the case, and that's the fact that Tan apparently got ripped off when he bought the weed. Less than half of it actually turned out to be marijuana, so no matter what happened, his wife wouldn't have ended up with a felony trafficking charge. It ended up being dumb luck for him too, I suppose, because it meant that the charges he ended up facing were also less severe. On August 29th of this year, Tan was sentenced to 3 years and 10 months in prison after pleading guilty to one count of possessing cannabis. Unsurprisingly, reports say that he and his wife are now divorced. Authorities in the Thai province of Samut Prakan say that they recently made arrests in an unusual case after the abbot of a Buddhist temple was the victim of an unhinged attack, and the man allegedly behind the crime offered a bizarre excuse for his actions. The whole thing began on August 22nd, when the victim, Prakru Prunyataro, showed up at a police station in Preah Samat Chedi district saying that he had been the victim of a crime. Prakru, who is the abbot of a local Buddhist temple, said that he was receiving food offerings that morning about a half-mile away from the temple grounds when an unknown man approached him from behind. Before he could react to what was happening, the man had run up and poured a liquid on top of him, after which he fled on a motorcycle. The abbot explained that as soon as the substance came in contact with his body, he felt a burning sensation and had to remove his robes. Luckily, witnesses quickly rushed to his aid and cleaned him off with water before taking him to a hospital. Once there, the doctor informed him that the liquid that had been poured on him had likely been mixed with some kind of acid. However, it wasn't concentrated enough to do severe damage. Following an investigation, police arrested the alleged acid attacker a couple weeks later on September 8th. The man, 44-year-old Klue Samwang, denied any involvement, though strangely apologized and gave them the name of the person he said was really behind what had happened. That name was Chatchai Chantantamo, a 39-year-old who just so happened to be a monk at the very same temple as the victim. When Chatchai was arrested and questioned, he admitted to being the mastermind behind the crime and said that he had paid Klue 3,300 baht, or about $100, to carry out the attack on the abbot. However, he also offered a strange defense of his actions. According to Chatchai, he never told Klue to use acid during the incident. Instead, he insisted that he had instructed him to use poop. In fact, he went as far as to accuse the abbot of lying about what had happened, stating that the so-called chemical burns he had showed police were actually just rashes from a previous shingles infection. While it appears the police have not officially weighed in on the validity of these claims yet, none of it changes the fact that Chatchai still allegedly admitted to planning and ordering the crime. He stated that he had done this because the abbot had treated him badly for a long time and had recently excluded him from an important temple ceremony. Police say that Chatchai and Klue are now each facing a charge of physically assaulting another person, leading to both physical and mental harm. If convicted, they're looking at up to 2 years in prison, a fine up to the equivalent of about $1,200 US, or both. Authorities in the Australian state of New South Wales say that they have an unlikely helper to thank this week after an unlucky kangaroo led them to a sizable drug bust. The whole thing started around 1 p.m. on September 27th when police were called to the scene of a single vehicle accident on the Sturt Highway, roughly 16 miles west of the town of Darlington Point. Officers arrived to find that the male driver of the car, later identified as Omar Akech, had hit a kangaroo while traveling down the road. As part of their investigation into the collision, police conducted a search of Akech's vehicle. When they did, they quickly found a large haul of marijuana in the trunk. In all, authorities say they recovered more than 44 kilograms, or about 100 pounds. Akech was arrested and has now been charged with drug dealing and possession of commercial levels of an illicit drug. Unfortunately, no update has been given on the condition of the kangaroo that he hit. Authorities in South Australia say that a man is facing a number of charges this week following a bizarre and reckless speeding incident on a motorcycle. According to reports, the whole thing began at around 12:30 p.m. on September 27th, when the 54-year-old driver was captured on a traffic camera while ripping down Coldy Road in the rural town of Tailem Bend. At the time, he was clocked going 151 kilometers per hour, or about 95 miles per hour in a 30 zone. Several minutes later, he was captured again going in the opposite direction, this time at a more modest 146 kilometers per hour. While the speed of the bike alone was dangerous, authorities say that wasn't the only part of the situation that was reckless. Instead of a helmet, the 54-year-old was apparently wearing a pirate hat on his head, along with a set of goggles. Police were quickly able to locate the man and his vehicle at his address, where he was charged with 2 counts of driving at an extreme speed, driving whilst disqualified, driving with incorrect plates, and failing to wear a helmet. It turns out his bike wasn't the only thing that experienced an extreme amount of speed that day, though. When the man submitted to a drug test, it came back positive for methamphetamine. At the time of this recording, the man, whose name has not been released, remains in custody. The owner of an office building in Thailand is urging police to take immediate action this week after he says he was the victim of 2 separate burglaries at his office, crimes that were allegedly carried out by a perpetrator with quite the bizarre MO. According to local media sources, the whole thing began at around 9 a.m. on October 3rd, when a member of the building's cleaning staff arrived at the office in Muang Rayong district to find that the place had been ransacked. Office supplies were scattered across the floor, and a number of items belonging to the business's owner, Paisit Jam Anukunat, were missing. Unfortunately, during that first burglary, the culprit had managed to disable the building's security system, so there wasn't much to go on. However, all of that changed roughly 2 weeks later, when another suspiciously similar crime took place. Only this time, the perpetrator was caught on surveillance video. When Paisit reviewed the footage, he was both baffled and disturbed by what he saw. The video showed that after midnight on October 14th, an unknown man had broken into the 3rd floor of the office via a nearby abandoned building. The man appeared extremely relaxed, even stopping momentarily to enjoy a soda and a coffee on one of the office's sofas. Just like last time, he proceeded to steal whatever valuables he could carry. Oh yeah, and he did all of this while completely naked. Eventually, the thief did put some clothes on, though this sort of begs the question as to why he was ever naked in the first place. What's even stranger is that he apparently could be seen trying on several outfits belonging to Paisit, which were kept in an area of the office that he sometimes uses as a bedroom. After taking his time, the unknown man finally left, making off with even more of Paisit's possessions. He even tried to steal a TV, but ended up leaving it on the ledge of a window, presumably because it was too large to carry. After going to police, Paisit also went to local media to get the word out about what had happened. He says that he's hoping publicity will lead to a quicker arrest, and that he's worried that the naked thief might be a danger to the community. In all, he estimates he's lost 200,000 baht, or about $6,000 US worth of property between the 2 burglaries. At the time of this recording, it appears that police are still searching for the unknown culprit, and that no arrests have been made. Representatives from Wales's Cardiff Crown Court say that a 36-year-old man has been sentenced to prison time this week, several months after a bizarre burglary that left the female victim both confused and deeply unsettled. The whole thing began on the evening of July 16th, 2024, when the female victim in question arrived home from work to find that someone had been inside of her residence in the county of Monmouthshire. Actually, that doesn't even begin to describe the strangeness of the situation. While the perpetrator had helped himself to some food, sweets, and a bottle of wine, he'd also done a number of household chores. In addition to hanging up the woman's laundry, the burglar had opened and put away the contents of several shopping bags, replaced the heads of her toothbrushes, cleaned and mopped her floors, and reorganized her refrigerator. Outside, he had rearranged several potted plants, taken out her recycling, and even refilled her bird feeders. It wasn't just food for himself that he had made either. Using ingredients in the woman's kitchen, he had cooked her dinner, next to which he had left a note. That note read, quote, "Don't worry, be happy, eat up and scratch." Well, I'm sure a lot of us are jokingly thinking right about now that we wish someone would break in and take care of all of our unwanted chores. The reality of the situation was pretty different for the female homeowner. She later explained how she was left afraid to return to her property because she wasn't sure if this was a one-off situation or whether somebody was stalking her. 2 weeks later, on July 29th, the reason behind the strange incident was finally pieced together when another break-in happened at a second local property. This time, the male suspect, later identified as 36-year-old Damian Vojnilovic, was caught in the act after the owner of the property was alerted to his presence by CCTV cameras. This time, Vojnilovic wasn't nearly as polite or considerate. After stealing some alcohol and getting drunk, he made a mess in the home's hot tub before being told to leave the residence. He was arrested shortly afterwards and linked to the first crime through DNA. Vojnilovic was apparently pretty apologetic to both victims following his arrest, stating that he did what he did because he was homeless and having some issues at the time. He has now pleaded guilty to 2 counts of burglary and was sentenced to 22 months in prison this week. Authorities in England say that a London-based cheese dealer is missing a large amount of cheddar, both literally and figuratively this week, after they were recently the targets of a sophisticated scam that saw them duped out of truckloads of product. According to reports, the whole thing began recently when the business in question, Neil's Yard Dairy, was contacted by a man posing as a wholesale distributor for a large French retailer. The man proceeded to inquire about making a large order from the company, which specializes in distributing some of the most well-known varieties of artisan cheddar from across the UK. The owner of Neil's, Sarah Stewart, says that initially she was excited to receive the business. Everything seemed to check out, and they went ahead with the deal, agreeing to drop off the products at a warehouse in the London area. However, just when it seemed like everything was looking good, disaster struck. As soon as the cheese was delivered, the so-called wholesale distributor vanished, along with 22 tons of the company's products. It's now believed that the person Sarah was dealing with was actually part of a sophisticated group of scammers. In all, she says that they were bilked out of 950 wheels of artisan cheddar, worth an estimated $390,000 US. The situation has understandably put Sarah's company in a tough spot, but she said that they have decided to still pay the producers of the cheese that they work with so that they don't have to bear the cost. That being said, she says she has been overwhelmed by the outpouring of support she has received from both inside the industry and from the public at large. As for the people responsible for the crime, police say that they are still investigating, but they suspect that the cheese has since been smuggled out of the country. It's believed the culprits will try to sell it off in the Middle East or Russia, where fewer questions will likely be asked about the criminal origins of the stolen cheese. The situation is still developing. If you're a regular viewer of our Crimes of the Week International series, then you'll probably remember that a couple of months ago we brought you a strange story out of Sydney, Australia. It was here, back in the summer, that we covered the heist of a massive amount of limited edition coins, which were made to commemorate the popular children's show Bluey. If you recall, the $1 coins, which were referred to as Bluey dollar bucks and featured an image of the eponymous cartoon dog, were produced by the Australian Mint, who were preparing for an official rollout in September. However, 2 months before that, an entire pallet of them, consisting of more than 63,000 coins, disappeared from a warehouse in Wetherill Park. There was a big incentive for the thieves as well. At the time, they were selling online for up to 10 times their value, making the haul potentially worth several $100,000 Australian dollars. At the time of our last report, police had arrested one person, 47-year-old Stephen Nielsen. The arrest came after a special team called Strike Force Bandit was set up to investigate the case. A second man was arrested back in August, later identified as 44-year-old Nasser Kanj. It is now believed that Nielsen, who worked at the warehouse where the coins were stored, was the one who masterminded the scheme, and that Kanj aided him in the heist. However, at the time of our previous video, very few of the coins had actually been recovered. Well, it seems that Strike Force Bandit has been pretty busy these last couple months, as they made two major announcements this week. First, they had arrested a third suspect, 27-year-old Christina Vale. It's alleged that Vale was the getaway driver during the incident, and she has now been charged with breaking and entering and disposing of stolen property. Just hours after Vale's arrest, authorities conducted a raid at a storage unit in Wentworthville. In addition to a number of stolen items, including power tools and clothing, they recovered more than 40,000 of the missing Bluey coins. Photos of the massive haul were released alongside the announcements this week, giving you an idea of just how many of these things the alleged thieves got their hands on. At the time of this recording, police say that they are still investigating and are asking anyone with information to please come forward. Authorities in the Peruvian capital of Lima say that a 28-year-old man was arrested last week after he allegedly tried to leave the country with hundreds of arachnids and arthropods strapped to his body as part of a ridiculous smuggling bid. The whole thing reportedly took place sometime on November 8th, when the man in question, identified only as a 28-year-old South Korean man, was at the Jorge Chavez International Airport. While on his way to board his flight, he was required to go through airport security, part of which included walking through a metal detector. While the illicit goods the man was carrying might not have been metal, it was pretty obvious that something was up. The man's chest and abdominal area were apparently bulging pretty noticeably, causing security personnel to perform a secondary inspection. When the man was asked to lift up his shirt, they quickly realized he had a whole bunch of live animals strapped to his body. Specifically, officials say the man was carrying 320 tarantulas, 110 centipedes, and 9 bullet ants. The 35 adult tarantulas were in larger plastic containers, while the smaller juveniles were simply crammed into little tubes that had been stuffed with tissue paper at both ends, or else put into Ziploc bags. Understandably, this was super illegal, and the 28-year-old was arrested on the spot. Police say that all of the creatures were taken from the Peruvian Amazon to which they are native, and that the tarantulas in particular are endangered. It's alleged that the suspect was attempting to smuggle them back to South Korea, where they would have fetched a high price on the illegal wildlife market. At the time of this recording, the man remains in custody on charges of attempting to smuggle an endangered species out of the country. Officials in South Korea say that a 26-year-old man has officially been sentenced this week after he was convicted in connection with a bizarre scheme designed to help him avoid his mandatory military service. For those unaware, South Korea has laws that require every able-bodied man over the age of 18 to serve in the military. Men are supposed to serve for at least 18 months, and once they are of legal age, are required to report for physical assessments. When the 26-year-old in question received his initial exam in October of 2017, he was apparently in perfect health, scoring in the second highest tier of the country's grading system. However, according to reports, he did not want to serve in a combat role, so he quite literally cooked up a scheme with one of his friends. Essentially, when he knew he was going to be called in for his final examination, he doubled his daily intake of food and started drinking a ton more water. The plan worked. Well, at least at first. By the time the 26-year-old was called in to be assessed last year, he weighed 225 pounds. You might not think that sounds like much, but keep in mind this guy is 5'6". It was determined he had a body mass index of nearly 36%, making him, quote, heavily obese, and meaning he only qualified to work in a non-combat office role at a government agency which would allow him to commute from home. Unfortunately for the suspect, authorities figured out that he had done all of this deliberately, and he was arrested, along with the friend who had helped to fatten him up. Eventually, both of them admitted to the scheme, though the friend argued that he never thought the 26-year-old would actually go through with the plan. Both men were facing up to 3 years in prison for violating the Military Service Act, though it appears that because they confessed and apologized, officials decided to give them lighter punishments. The 26-year-old was sentenced to 1 year in prison, while the friend was sentenced to 6 months. However, both sentences were suspended for 2 years. The 26-year-old must also still complete his military service. Authorities in South Australia say that a man is facing charges in connection with quite the bizarre case this week, after he got a little too carried away with the Christmas spirit. Or should I say, Christmas spirits. The whole thing began shortly after 8 p.m. on November 24th in the Adelaide suburb of Henley Beach. Locals were sitting around and enjoying food, drinks, and a bit of weekend relaxation when suddenly heads started to turn towards the Henley Square pedestrian area. The thing that caught everyone's attention was a gray Mazda hatchback, which was being driven by a 65-year-old man. The car was decked out with festive lights, ornaments, and random photos, and Christmas music was blasting out from inside. After pulling into the square, the driver did a couple of laps in his vehicle before parking off to the side. It was here that he was approached by police minutes later after confused and concerned witnesses called to alert them to what was happening. When questioned, the 65-year-old claimed that he had taken a wrong turn. However, officers soon came up with another explanation when the man was breathalyzed and was found to be over the legal limit for alcohol while driving. The 65-year-old was arrested and has since been charged with drink driving and dangerous driving. His festively decorated Mazda was also impounded until further notice. Officials were clearly amused by the whole thing in interviews after the fact. However, they were careful to reiterate the man's actions were dangerous. The pedestrian area is, well, for pedestrians, and the area he took his vehicle through specifically is normally crowded with people, especially children playing in the square's fountain. At the time of this recording, the man's name has not been released. Authorities in Japan's Kyoto prefecture are prosecuting a bizarre case this week, one that can perhaps best be summed up by the phrase, "Two wrongs don't make a right." The whole thing apparently started back near the end of this summer, when a 28-year-old man from the town of Koyama was arrested in connection with an unusual theft. Specifically, the man was accused of stealing green onions from local farmers in his area. The theft reportedly took place sometime between August 30th and September 1st, with the man allegedly making off with 216 kilograms, or 476 pounds of the vegetable. The green onions in question were a special heirloom variety known as Kujo Negi, though all in, it said that they were worth around 190,000 yen, or about $1,200 US. So yeah, not exactly the heist of the century. Now you're probably wondering, with such a meager score, why even go to all this trouble? Well, here's where things get weird. Apparently, the 28-year-old suspect was a green onion farmer himself, and he needed the stolen vegetables to cover his own crop shortfall. The man told police after he was caught that due to the summer heat, his yield was extremely low, meaning he wasn't able to supply his clients with the roughly 800 kilos a week that he had promised them. He said he started stealing to fill the gap in supply so he wouldn't lose customers, and that he had actually gotten the idea because he had also been the victim of crop theft. He estimated he had lost about 200 to 300 kilos of his own green onions back in July, so he figured the easiest way to get out of his jam now was to start stealing as well. Of course, this was still illegal, and despite the admission, the man was convicted of theft. According to local media sources, he could be looking at up to 2 years in prison, though he and his lawyers are apparently hoping the judge will go easy on him. As you might imagine, the case has sparked a lot of conversation, as well as some jokes online. One news source we came across amusingly quipped that it's often said that violence begets more violence. However, this might be the first case of green onion theft begetting more green onion theft. Authorities in southern France say that a bizarre theft case that began more than 2 decades ago recently came to an equally strange end after the man responsible returned what he stole, accidentally giving himself away in the process. According to reports, it all started one night in April of 1999 when an iconic weather vane was stolen from the town of Besson. The The weather vane, which featured a large rooster and was made out of iron and had been painted gold, sat atop a 26-foot-tall Catholic mission cross, which was in the middle of the small town. While most people eventually forgot about the weather vane, there was one man who apparently couldn't let it go. That man, local historian Michel Sabatry, continued to write articles and keep the story of the stolen rooster alive, convinced that one day it would be found. Despite his conviction, I'm going to guess that even Sabatry was a little surprised at what happened next. In November of 2023, a package arrived out of the blue on his doorstep. Inside was the missing weather vane, along with a note that read, quote, "After a long journey, I am back on the land where I was born. Dear Bassalnais, I missed you. May my song resonate again." Fortunately for police, it wasn't hard to put the final missing piece of the puzzle into place. Though the thief had tried to send the package to Sabatry anonymously, he had paid for postage with his credit card, allowing investigators to quickly track him down. During an interview, the man explained that he had stolen the weather vane nearly 25 years ago during a night of drunken antics. When he woke up the next day, he was too ashamed to return it, so he stuffed it in his basement and forgot about it. A little while back, he came across it again while doing some cleaning, and decided that he wanted to try and make things right, so he sent it back. It appears that the man didn't need to bother with all the secrecy though, as it hasn't been possible to prosecute him for the crime for quite some time. The statute of limitations for petty theft in France is 6 years, so he wouldn't have faced any penalties as far back as 2005. Because of this, the man's name has not been released. Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a second to give a huge shout out to everyone who has made it this far into the video. Seriously, thank you so much for watching. If you found today's upload interesting and informative, we'd be honored if you consider liking and subscribing, as well as hitting the notification bell and selecting all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. If you're looking for additional ways to help support the channel, we'd love to have you join us over on Patreon. Patrons get ad-free and early access to all of our content, as well as 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. You can learn more at patreon.com/crimezone, where you'll also find some of the fine folks whose names are currently on screen. All that being said, we understand that not everyone has the means to support financially, and that's totally okay. We appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much, everyone, and take care.